This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome everyone to today's Environment Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us as we discuss the important topic of swimmable rivers. This meeting marks the beginning of a three-part investigation that will explore the Mayor's commitment to developing a plan for swimmable rivers. We will also consider how the Mayor can collaborate with partners across London to improve water quality and enhance river accessibility for Londoners. Before we get started, we just have a few housekeeping notes to address. May I please remind everyone to switch phones to silent mode. I ask that members and guests ensure that electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Also, please position your microphone so you can be heard clearly. If you need to adjust your microphone, remember to pick it up from the base. Members of the public are encouraged to follow @London Assembly on X, or hopefully Blue Sky as well, and to use the hashtag #AssemblyEnvironment for this meeting. Now I have a few items of business to cover. Can I now ask our committee officer, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Sal. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out in Agenda Item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from its previous meetings and the additional correspondence sent and received? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me as chair and the delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's letter as outlined in the agenda report? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recent responses to its investigations and recommendations attached as appendices to the agenda report? Thank you. Now to today's main item of business, a discussion on swimmable rivers. Today's meeting will be divided into two panels. I would like to welcome our guests for the first panel. We're joined by Theo Thomas, who's Chief Executive of the London Waterkeeper, and Charlie Wood, who is London Area Director of the Environment Agency. Welcome both, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My first question is to both of you, and I might start with you, Thomas. So the Mayor is committed to putting together what he calls an ambitious plan to make rivers in London swimmable within 10 years. How would you assess the current health of London's rivers?
Well, I think from your previous committee hearings, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today, that you've obviously identified that rivers have various challenges. We know under the Water Framework Directive, there might be a section of the Wandle that reaches good, but all the rest are moderate. And yeah, the public perception is that rivers are in trouble and aren't healthy. And in terms of the context of this discussion and bathing water or rivers you can swim in, then of course none of the rivers in London are tested for bathing water quality. So that's E. coli, intestinal enterococci, and as a result it's impossible to say whether rivers are fit to swim in London or not, because that data just doesn't exist.
Thank you very much. Charlie.
So firstly, yes, I thought after all this time I would remember how to do that. So the Environment Agency supports any initiative that helps healthy rivers, and so we fully support anything that improves the state of the waterways and engages people into, and enjoy the waterways. And there's proven multiple benefits of doing that. And there's, great improvements in sort of mental health, as well as, in these periods of heat that we've seen, cooling as well. So the access is important, and it goes alongside the push that we're having at the moment around healthy rivers across the whole of England. We are also stepping up our responsibilities as a robust regulator, and there's a number of different actions that we're taking that I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute. But specifically around London's waterways, just sort of building on what you've just said there, Theo. So at the moment, there are 41 classified London rivers, under the Water Framework Directive. 36 of those are moderate, 3 are poor, and 2 are bad. So that's with a classification of high, good, moderate, poor, and bad, where moderate is a moderate change from natural conditions because of human activity, and then down to bad, where bad is a severe change from natural conditions because of human activity. So, as Theo said, our waterways, as we know them, monitored for environmental purposes, are not in a good condition within London. And this is something that the Environment Agency's, was part of our purpose of forming in the first place, and our predecessors of the National Rivers Authority to work and try and resolve. So we do work closely with our partners and communities and water companies to try and improve that. But that's currently where we are. And also, there are 4 classified bathing waters within London. So we've got Hampstead Ladies Pool that is currently good, Hampstead Men's that's excellent, as well as Hampstead Mix is excellent, and the Serpentine is sufficient, and that's pretty much been stable for several years. So I'll leave it there, but that's currently where I see things at the moment.
That's a really clear introduction from you both. Thank you. Assemblymember Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. There we are. We know that the Mayor's identified potential swimming locations at, let's see, Hackney Marshes, Teddington and Albany Reach, and the river, now is it Roding or Rodding, who knows? Do you agree with those locations? Are they the right and safe ones? Do you feel that there are others that could be added into the mix? Either, please.
So, I mean, as Theo had previously said, at the moment we don't monitor for bathing water classifications. There are a number of health risks in the water environment, even at bathing water designated sites. I think, there are always risks that you need to take into account when getting into a natural environment. So when you look at the classification of those specific sites that have been identified, so Hackney Marshes, you have the River Lee running through it, so that's currently at bad ecological status. It's a heavily modified, it fails on its fish sampling, and also fails on priority hazardous substances. The River Roding is at a moderate status, and the reasons for not achieving good are urban diffuse pollution, misconnections, sewage discharge and physical modification. Teddington, so the Albany reaches Teddington of the River Thames, which is a non-tidal section, and that's got poor ecological status and fails for macrophytes, which are water plants. And the reasons for not achieving good status is due to sewage discharge, diffuse pollution, and agricultural nutrients. So, you know, whether they're the right places or not, I don't think we really have the evidence from a health point of view to know. And as you can see, all of these bodies, most of those bodies are heavily modified, so getting in and out of them usually means that you have, you know, steep-sided, canalised, you know, water bodies that were put like that so that you could get the waters away fast and prevent flooding. So, you know, there are lots of reasons that probably need to explore those in, you know, more detail and understand exactly what the Mayor's plans are for those places to make sure that any swimming or any enjoyment of the river is as safe as possible for everybody that might consider it, I suppose.
I think it's problematic to start putting pins in a map because we've lost the culture of swimming outdoors. It used to be something that was very popular back in the 1920s. That's a long time ago, so far away to almost be irrelevant. But that idea of going out and swimming or being near the water was something that was popular with people. And it's not necessarily about swimming as much as just either, you know, getting up to your ankles in the water or just being there with your families or your friends and having a place to relax. I think there's been too much of an emphasis on the kind of people that might want to swim a kilometre. I can't swim a kilometre, but I don't mind thrashing around for a little bit. And there are lots of people who don't even go to swimming pools and don't know how to swim. So for them to be thinking of going to, you know, one of these 4 new places, I think is going to be tricky. Hackney Marshes where the Lee is, it is, you know, the old River Lee, but is that a suitable place for swimming or for lots of people gathering? I mean, there's a lot of sort of sensitive wildlife there. Sometimes that river just isn't deep enough. You know, the hotter the weather, the less rain, the shallower it is, and that's going to be an issue with lots of places. So I think it is about changing the culture, about having this conversation with people about what it would mean to go and swim somewhere. Why is it that you're not? What would make it appealing? And then we've got 8 places that do have designated bathing status. So almost understanding who's using those and encouraging more people to go to those places which are going to be safer just because they are designated, they have water quality testing. People will be swimming in all manner of locations around London, and they're choosing to do that without being told or discouraged, and that's their decision, that's their understanding of what their risks are. So we're going from a very small number of people, in a way. It maybe reached peak outdoor swimming vibe during lockdown and COVID when people started doing it, and then came the realisation that there's a risk you come into contact with sewage. So I'd say we've actually gone back in terms of the number of people that, you know, when the surveys are published, actually want to go into open water or outdoor swimming because they are uncertain of the risks and of the water quality. So I think we've got a long way to go in terms of building that narrative and the dialogue with people in terms of what does it mean to have rivers you can swim in London.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just one very quick further one. The big talking point in Teddington, of course, is the Thames Water Direct River Abstraction schemes. What's your understanding of how that might impact on the swimmability, if that's a word, of Teddington and its suitability as a choice on this list?
So obviously we're working closely with Thames Water on that scheme. I think that particular site, you know, care needs to be taken if a new structure will be discharging or abstracting within that area. I mean, that area is also really close to our Loch and Weir system, which obviously we discourage any swimming anywhere near that. So I think care needs to be taken in that stretch so that all of those risks are understood. And also where across London, people are getting into water bodies, let's provide some advice and, so that they fully understand the risks that they are, they're choosing to get in their water body. So they understand fully the risks that they're taking by getting in there.
Okay, thank you. You don't have to. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the question's well put. Just to acknowledge, we've had a letter from Save Our Land and Rivers Solar, who I know you know well, Assembly Member Roberts, and we'll be feeding all of that work into our investigation. Assembly Member Tyrrell.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So, thinking out about the actual plan to clean up the rivers, what should that plan look like? Who should it include, and what are the key organisations that should be involved? If we start with Charlie.
So cleaning up, the waterways in London, it is something that we have been trying to do for a very long time, and it's something we're incredibly passionate about as an organisation. But that any steps towards those improvements have only happened through collaboration across with a whole number of parties. So NGOs such as Thames 21. The London Zoological Society, and then you need to also, I think one of the important things is understanding exactly what Londoners want, and knowing exactly where they want to go, for what purposes. Is it about swimming? Is it about access to the waterways? Is it about being close to the water, being on the water, in the water? All of those things. And then there's obviously a role for those that pollute and making sure that they understand the impact that they're having. And then us as regulators, to make sure that we're doing everything we can within our regulatory powers to, regulate those polluters. So I think it has to be a full collaboration to cover off all of the issues that we're facing at the moment. But that can't happen unless all parties are playing. I think the other thing is that people who live near the rivers are really, or walk their dogs near the rivers, or currently, utilise those rivers, are really important because they let us know when pollution is taking place. They report that on our, through our line, and that then gets to us. We're able to then use that information to usually talk to the water company to understand where misconnections might happen, and that allows us to understand those water bodies in more detail.
I think we have to start looking at the detail. What are the solutions that we want to see? And there's a lack of that to a degree, I think, currently. There's been a lot of noise about sewer overflows, storm overflows and all of that, and that's useful to a degree, but if it's just a continuation of that noise, we just get caught up in a doom cycle. So how are we going to resolve those? A lot of these are going to be quite small rivers, so potentially having a significant impact. The government asked Thames Water, all water companies, to come up with a storm overflow reduction plan, and the government and the water companies all say they want to see natural drainage, green infrastructure, sustainable drainage used to reduce at least 25% of the storm overflows, and that's great. And then Thames Water put its plan out, and there's a very sort of complex and dense spreadsheet that lists all of their sewer overflows, and you kind of go across and see whether it's going to be using sustainable drainage or concrete storage tanks. And in London, only 6% is it proposed to use sustainable drainage. And this in a city that's been heavily paved, that is not climate resilient, that has quite significant risks of local surface water flooding, and only 6% is used. And we've asked Thames Water for details about those, and it seems like it's quite hollow in terms of how much work has been done on that. And then talking about, well, we'll have completed these assessments by 2027. And that's not good enough. So it's unclear that green infrastructure is being looked at, and instead what will happen will be the same old kind of conventional engineering, nice big concrete storage tank, which is not climate resilient. It's very sort of fixed infrastructure, as opposed to using sort of like lots of green planted areas across a wide area to mitigate that rain, so it's not getting into the sewers. And it's rain that causes most of the sewer overflows. It's not, I would say, capacity in the same way that we talk. And I think with the tideway tunnel being switched on, a lot of people were saying, well, let's do more of that. That's a very distinct and unique solution that was easy to do because it was under the Thames. Try digging up London to put storage tanks underneath where people, near where people live, and the disruption would be massive. So I think that we need more detail on what the plans are. I mean, we have the surface water drainage strategy, which talks about the creation of 7,000 hectares of green infrastructure placed to soak up the rain. But none of those, as far as we're aware, have been connected to also trying to reduce sewer overflows. So you've got up on the Willesden Brook a combined sewer, or sewer overflow, right? It's not a combined sewer system, that spills quite frequently to the Willesden Brook. And there are plans to create areas to reduce surface water flooding, but they haven't done the modelling to see whether it's also going to reduce the sewer overflowing. So those two plans need to be merged together. Otherwise, we risk missing a lot of cost efficiencies. And then misconnections, Charlie mentioned, that is a big problem, quite an unquantified problem. Thames Water are very good at rectifying that. Again, to go back to the Willesden Brook, there's something like 400 properties last year that they reported on having misconnections, and some of those having multiple sinks, toilets, washing machines going straight into the Willesden Brook. And of that 400, about 90% were rectified, just from knocking on the door and telling the property owner, you've got something here that's connected to your drain pipe that's going into the river. And so that's got a very good clean-up rate. In the last business plan, they asked for increased funding to be able to do investigations to find and rectify 750 outfalls that were going into rivers across London. They didn't get that settlement from Ofwat, and so the number of misconnections being rectified currently in this 5-year period, will end at the end of this year, in 2025, is the same as the previous one, 40 a year. And ZSL, when it did its report, found that there were probably around 1,000 outfalls, multiple properties going into rivers, and that's whole homes, blocks of flats, schools, where every sink and every toilet is getting flushed into the... So there's we have a good system, but it just doesn't even keep pace, because those misconnections come back online as other people do home improvements, or a big property developer creates massive blocks of flats, and it turns out they're all plumbed into the river and not into the sewer system. So we'd like to see a little bit more kind of tough action on that. We think that in most cases it's local authorities that take the enforcement action of properties that won't clean up and rectify their misconnections. We'd like to see the Environment Agency using the Environmental Permitting Regulations 2016, where you've got a big property developer that has had its drainage signed off, and it turns out that it's going to be sending its wastewater into the river. We'd like those, that's a criminal offence. You're breaking the Environmental Permitting Regulations, you're polluting that river. If you dumped a load of waste on the roadside, you could do jail time for that. And we kind of think that too few people know that misconnections aren't just an unfortunate thing, they're an illegal act. If the law was brought to bear, and people feared the Environment Agency a bit more, and so those property developers, their directors wouldn't want to get ending up in court or getting fined or in prison, because they know the Environment Agency is going to come along and hammer them for breaking the law. So we think turning up the volume on that sort of pressure would be, we would very much welcome. And similarly, in terms of the amount of road runoff and pollution that comes off paved surfaces, that alone would see all rivers in London fail water quality standards. And again, there's some good work where sustainable drainage is being used to intercept it, and TfL and the Environment Agency and Thames Water and others have come up with a model with Thames 21 that allows you, and Middlesex University allows you to identify where the worst roads are. So all of that is great. But again,
sorry, I'm going to have to push you to wrap up because we've got a lot of questions to get through.
So we'd like to see the Environment Agency going to the operators of large car parks and industrial estates and saying, do you have an interceptor fitted so none of this stuff gets washed into the river? And if you don't, I mean, they wrote a letter to, or the EFRA committee at Parliament asked them to write a letter to all supermarkets saying, we hope that where you've got car washing, it's not going straight into the river, because that's breaking the law if it is. And none of those supermarkets replied, because maybe they felt like they could get away with it.
So if I could just jump in just because of time commitment, because obviously there's a lot of detail in this particular answer of where the law isn't particularly, perhaps with the Chair's permission, I could ask if you write to us with that information so that we can make sure it's included in the report. And then if I could just turn back to Charlie briefly on this, obviously as mentioned, is that the actual maintenance for the rivers themselves or streams, water bodies, all falls within local government. Falls to the boroughs to actually conduct the work. Do you think that should have more legal protection as a statutory service so it doesn't fall victim to or doesn't become an easy target for cuts when councils are facing difficulty and crisis to make sure our rivers are protected?
So some of the rivers are ours because they're main rivers, and some then are down to the local authorities. And maintenance is always something that we look at, especially at the Thames Regional Flood and Coastal Committee. And it is something being discussed within government as far as I'm aware. So I think they are aware, and as they're coming to power now, they'll probably be looking at that. So, but I don't know any specific. That's a question for government.
Yeah, fair. Thank you very much. And then throwing it back out to both of you then is that the Thames Tideway Tunnel is expected to deal with 95% of sewage overflow into the tidal Thames. And I'll start with Theo this time. Are you confident that the Tideway Tunnel will achieve this in practice?
I think it will hit the 4 spills a year. I mean, it should do for £4.2 billion. There's a slight misunderstanding, I think, in terms of that 95%. So when the Tideway Tunnel was first proposed, the top figure for the amount of sewage and rainwater was ending up in the Thames was 39 million tonnes. And that's been quoted in ever since, 39 million tonnes. It's not reducing 95% of that, because in 2016 the Lead Tunnel was completed, and Abbey Mills alone, that combined sewer overflow was 40% of all overflows to the Thames. And the 5 tidal sewage works were upgraded as well: Malden, Crossness, Longreach, Beckton and Riverside. And combined, they're probably taking somewhere around sort of 60%. So the Tideway Tunnel is probably taking around 40%, and that's based on DEFRA's figures, 40 to 45% of the total. And it will, about a few weeks ago, they put out a press release where they talked about how it had held something like 500,000 cubic metres of rainwater and untreated sewage on or around a date in September. And it obviously didn't overflow to the Thames, and 4 of the valves have been opened for 21, which eventually all will be connected to the Tideway Tunnel. But it carried on raining for another 4 days. So while on the date they said there'd been 2 days of rain and about 50 millimetres of rain, resulting in 500,000 cubic metres, what was happening 4 days later when 100 millimetres of rain? Was it still holding it all, or had it overflowed? So we've sent an information request to Thames Water to try and understand that. So I think whatever and however happens once it's fully operational, Thames Water and Tideway need to be incredibly precise and transparent on how it's performing, because we're all paying it out of our water bills, and that size of investment we need to know that it's doing what it should be.
Okay, anything to add to that, Charlie?
Yes, absolutely. So I work very closely with Thames Water and Tideway and have done for many years on this project. And as Theo says, it's part of a wider improvement plan that we've had with them, and we've been very robust in ensuring that happens. Yes, it will, collect the 95% of what was, intended to happen by the tunnel. And our close regulation in setting out what the operating technique will be, and also the permits that sit along. So we've had to update hundreds of permits to ensure that the tunnel's ready to go. You know, and I've seen and spoken to the people that are operating the tunnel, so I can say that, you know, that it is receiving its flows, it is working as intended at the moment. And actually over the weekend, we saw that it was 900,000 tonnes were collected over that heavy rain we saw over, I think it was Sunday, wasn't it? So yeah, absolutely. And we're not seeing any unintended discharges. All the connections are not made quite yet, so we're not quite there. But right now it's behaving as we expect. We are also making sure that the benefits that were intended to be seen by the tunnel will be seen, and that we're able to provide that evidence alongside, so all three parties are very open and transparent with that data, so it can be scrutinised, and what bill payers have paid for, you know, you will see back. So we'll keep working incredibly closely with them so that we can be clear that that is happening.
Thank you. And Theo, you mentioned some correspondence with Thames Water. Not to put you on pressure now, but anything you can share with us that you're happy to be in the public domain, that would be really great, because we don't want to get in the doom cycle either, but we do want to push Thames Water. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, the Thames Tideway, of course, starts in my constituency, and it's good that it started to be switched on. And obviously, you know, we're waiting over the next few months to see how that rolls out. And you're right there, Theo, to be making sure that we test the theory of the impact it's meant to have. Because so my question was going to be initially about misconnections. You've talked, you know, in quite considerable detail there, Theo, about the impact of that. One of those issues that you raised was really for me to then sort of follow on that on with Charlie in terms of the ability to fine when those, you know, because of misconnections. How does it operate at the moment in terms of, you know, how much are you doing, and what's needed to be able to, you know, take that to the next level? For fines in relation to misconnection. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I've got some stats here, which Theo sort of slightly touched on. So, like over 4,000 misconnected appliances were found in the last 3 years, and 23% of those were washing machines, 21% were for kitchen sinks, and 89% of those property owners, once identified, you know, did actually resolve them themselves. So I think, you know, we do need to focus on that. And as I said previously, you know, the more people are going out and seeing the river and reporting the pollution, then you can get back and ensure that that's the case. So something that we were able to do in May is take a step change in our regulatory activity. And so we've been doing a whole list of things, which I will now reel off, where, you know, we've been able to really change what we do from a regulatory point of view. So we've been driving up the monitoring of the new flow monitors. So this includes obviously more with water companies as well as agriculture, as well as misconnections, but also increasing the water company inspections, which obviously allows us to understand and uncover the non-compliance. We're carrying out the largest ever criminal investigation into the potential widespread non-compliance by water companies. We're also supporting farmers to reduce water pollution and increase our agricultural regulation as well, which is important for those sites that are sort of, you know, will be receiving the water further up in the River Thames. And we are investing £15 million in enhancing our digital systems and tools, so ensuring that the data and information from lots of sources can be combined, and we can clearly understand what that is. So in those misconnections worlds, knowing where that's coming from and then understanding the sources and trying to work with the sources to try and solve those problems. And we also have invested in 500 additional staff, so they'll be able to go out on site, whether it's with you know, water companies, at those misconnection sites where those reports are happening, or on agricultural sites. And we also will prioritise attendance at all Category 1 and 2 serious pollution incidents, and increasing our attendance at the Category 3 water company pollution incidents as well. We're also being more open and transparent about how we go about our regulation, and we've also launched our new water hub, where all information on water is held in one place, so that the public, but also NGOs and others, can go and find that information, maybe put together things and report stuff to us, and then we're able to go out and carry out those investigations.
Thank you. Just to clarify, first of all, that the 500 extra staff you were talking about, is that just for London?
Across the country.
Across the country.
Yes.
So how many of those are for London?
I'd need to be clear, because obviously it's the whole of the Thames water catchment, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, so I'd have to clarify that and get back to you.
No, fair enough. And in terms of the new water hub that you've referred to, which sounds like an excellent development going forward. So I was at a meeting with residents in my patch last week. It was around flooding, but obviously sort of clearly if waters flood because of the overflows, and then what then goes back into the river afterwards, etc., very much goes back to this topic. What is the sort of the ideal approach in terms of that partnership that you have with the Environment Agency, but all those other organisations that have responsibility? So the local authorities in terms of managing pollution, and TfL, of course, as well.
So sorry.
So working together with TfL and boroughs, what's the best way to deal with the pollution and road runoff, for example?
And so I think it's making sure that we try and understand what the source is, and therefore who's responsible, because governance within London with regards to water, can be quite complicated. And so actually it might not be one source, it might be multiple sources. And together we need to work through who can take the action and try and resolve that issue.
Is there a particular example of, particularly good example of where you've worked together to deal with an issue?
Off the top of my head, I'm just trying to think. There are, and my brain's gone dead with names of places. So on the River Lee, actually, we've got a integrated water management plan at a sort of sub-regional level, where we've brought all those partners together to really map out, and that's about not just quality, it's about water quantity and lack of it. So the whole water cycle, and looking at it as one, and really mapping out all the players, where all the sources of pollution are, where the flooding is, and trying to come up with a solution together. Because a lot of what was mentioned earlier, around SUDS, putting SUDS in place doesn't just help flooding, it's also helping with reducing the amount of water that's getting into the system, getting into the ground, and flowing out through the CSOs. But also it helps biodiversity as well. So, there's a number of different factors that can come into play. But I could provide some other examples.
Thank you. And I'll come back to SUDS in a moment. But just in terms of, obviously, the government has introduced that it's going to be bringing forward the new Water Special Measures Bill, a new Independent Water Commission, to propose reforms for the water sector. You've touched on some of the changes that have happened already. What changes do you feel are needed as part of the regulatory framework to protect our rivers from pollution?
Do you want to?
Well, I think that we need to activate as many of the laws we've already had. I mean, I think that we've got strong environmental legislation in this country, and when the Environment Agency is resourced effectively with its dedicated staff, recruiting more dedicated staff, then it becomes a powerful force within raising standards. We want to see, we don't really want to see more and more fines and bigger fines. We want to see compliance, preventative measures, so that it doesn't happen in the first place. And we're not at that stage yet, but I think a well-resourced and effective Environment Agency can get us there with support of people and of groups at a community level as well, knowing that if they report something, it's going to be followed up and enforced, and things that could change that aren't being used at the moment. So the Flood and Water Management Act of 2010 is on the statute books. The last government said it was going to activate Schedule 3, and we're getting quite kind of sneaky now, but that removes water companies, removes developers the right to automatically connect their drainage to the sewers or the drainage system, unless they've installed sustainable drainage so that no more rain leaves that site than if it was a green field. But Schedule 3 has never been activated, so it's just latent within the legislation. So the previous government didn't do it. We're hoping that the new government will do it, particularly if you're going to be building more homes, because it's only new developments this will work for. But if we build more homes and don't activate Schedule 3, then we risk making things worse. We resist not only increasing flood risk and river pollution from sewer overflows, but reducing the resilience of that new housing stock, which would be ridiculous, given that using sustainable drainage is at least the same cost, but in many cases cheaper, and makes a better living realm for those properties. So that would be something we would like to see, and it's things like that that we need to change.
Oh, sorry, just quickly before you come in, Charlie. So is that addressed in the current London plan?
I can't remember what the current one. I think it says activate it. I think everybody agrees it should be activated. It just hasn't been. So we want Steve Reed to do that, and he can do that with a swish of his pen.
So executive order, effectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's, not to drag it out, but I agree with what Theo says. We actually have some really strong regulation in place. As a result of a lot of the European laws that were put in with the Water Framework Directive and the Floods and Water Management Bill, subsequent to that. So I think the powers are there. We just need to use the full set of them. But the London plan does actually set out, actually gets down into a lot more detail of that, and actually it does have really good powers in place. But I think, ensuring that is enforced in totality by everybody, so that's not just for the Environment Agency, but also for the boroughs and other players, is a really important thing. So the Mayor himself, there's the responsibility to ensure that the London plan is enacted as well. And I think if all those policies were followed, we'd actually be in a much better place. But obviously there's lots of competing demands across the whole of the London plan. So yeah, it makes it a difficult balancing act of which one to follow.
So just on that point, so you've effectively both said that you don't really need new laws and regulations. You've got enough powers that exist at the moment. How has your ability to enforce those changed over the last decade, perhaps, Charlie? And what would you need to be able to go forward? I mean, Theo's obviously given one example of that sort of executive order on Section 3, but actually what else is needed to be able to...
And so in May we did get given additional funding to be able to step up our regulatory responsibilities within that regulatory framework we already had. And I listed off a whole load of things, but I can give you more detail on that. And that will allow us to do that. By having those additional staff, by having better ways of analysing the data, all of those things together will hopefully allow us to do our job better.
But so you said obviously you've got those new things as of May, and that's relatively recently. So you're obviously still implementing all of that. But is there anything else in terms of given that this is politically a priority for the new government, what else is if you had an ask effectively, what would be your ask at the moment?
I think for us to be able to continue with those collaborative relationships, I think if everybody also has the ability to put the right resources into place and the right priorities into place, then that allows you to understand that. Having initiatives like the Integrated Water Management Plan, which focuses your mind on some priority catchments, does really, really help, and allows you, to focus the resource, the money, and the skills in the right place. So, some support to be able to do that. I also have led the London Surface Water Group, that, and so that that's that kind of multiple benefit. And what we're looking at there is those priority catchments, which actually are the same priority catchments you need to look at from a flood risk point of view as you do from a water quality. So I think if we are able to focus our efforts in those places, in a backdrop of limited resources, then hopefully we should be able to therefore, get behind that. So I suppose the ask is to, if the mayor and the local authorities are able to prioritise their resources to those places, that would really help us. And another thing that I think that maybe the mayor can do is help, with that community engagement, where, London is a heavily populated place for us. So trying to get out into those communities, we're stretched across the board. So whereas he has a voice that people want to listen to. So hopefully he could get out there, engage those communities in the priority catchments and focus our efforts there and try and make a difference there. And, prove some concepts of how you could deliver schemes that have multiple benefits, potentially bring in other sources of funding, that kind of thing.
I'd like to trim some regulations rather than new ones. I'd like to remove from the Deregulation Act 2015 the way it makes the Environment Agency. It basically says enforcement action should be a last resort, help the business first. Now that's lovely if you've got a little local family-run business that didn't know it was polluting the environment. But where you have serial polluters committing criminal offences, then clearly enforcement is needed there, particularly if these are repeated offences and they've been visited by the Environment Agency and not taken action, then there should be no tolerance for helping them, because what that does is quite insidious. It undermines any other company that is choosing to not damage the environment, and it costs to not do that, and actually is supporting companies that are exporting their pollution into the environment. That's had to deal with it, and then ultimately us as well. So that also is responsibility on a similar thing with Ofwat, where they have responsibility to make sure water companies always make a profit. They're monopoly suppliers. They don't get that right. We expect them to comply with the laws. We expect polluters to not pollute. And where that isn't happening, then they face the full force of the law.
Thank you for that. So in relation to just sticking with that enforcement point, Charlie, do you feel like you've got the powers and the information and knowledge to be able to, to bring about that enforcement action that's required?
Now that we have, the additional resources that I've identified, and we're stepping up that regulation, we hope that we will be able to carry out more enforcement action. And I think what we'll need to see is how that plays out in a big urban environment, and what we're able to identify and be absolutely clear the sources of some of those pollution. It's obviously easier when it's a water company discharge, but the misconnections, is a trickier place. So, yeah.
And you talked earlier, Theo, I think you mentioned 6% of London is currently sustainable urban drainage systems in place, so SUDS. Clearly there's an opportunity there in terms of more natural solutions to fix this problem that we've got. I think the biggest project in London was actually delivered at Tolworth Roundabout in Gareth's Assembly Member Roberts' patch there by TfL. So, and I think as part of the current plans, there's about 200 hectares across London, which as part of the plan, which to try and transfer into SUDS land. What role does that have in terms? How important is that in terms of fixing this problem?
So I think it's a really important role, and as such, has been identified by the Thames Regional Flood and Coastal Committee. So they're there to prioritise where money gets spent, and it's really identified the fact that surface water flooding in London is one of the biggest risks we face, and natural flood management and sustainable urban drainage, is one of the solutions to that. So what we've been doing in my team, funded by the flood levy money through the Thames Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, is map out where those opportunities are for natural flood management, and also host events with the local authorities so that they understand how they could bring those projects forward. And we've also done a similar thing with the sustainable urban drainage systems as well. So that is bringing forward projects. And so hopefully, as we move forward with that, we'll see more and more projects come on board. There have also been, some issues in the way that funding has been, being able to be put in place to be able to bring forward those schemes. So we've tried a couple of different pilots of how we could change that way of funding. And look at a catchment and the volumes of water that could be taken out of that, out of those catchments, and then put in projects into place. So I think that we're in quite a good place in London in identifying where we can go and how we can go about doing that. I think it's now just a step change in getting it done. And through the work that I previously mentioned, identifying those priority catchments and getting them delivered in the priority catchments, hopefully we'll make that progress that we're seeing. We're also working closely with other cities around the world, because really they're our only comparator. So we've been working closely with New York and Singapore to understand exactly what they're doing. And actually, I think we're in a quite similar place. And we do talk to others like Copenhagen, etc., but we're just of a different scale. A lot of those places are just one or two of our boroughs rather than the whole 32. So I think we're doing okay. We're making progress, but we now really need to get on with sort of delivering projects as that collective.
And in terms of that prioritisation that you talked about, is that about flood mitigation? Is it about better quality rivers, or is it a combination of the two?
So at the moment, that's about flood risk management from a sort of surface water point of view. And I'm really interested in what Theo says. I'd love us to be able to clearly identify, where you get those multiple benefits. And it's not just for water quality and for flood risk, but also, as I mentioned at the beginning, like mental health and cooling. There's lots of things that come with putting the natural flood management in place, or whatever it might be. And, let's try and work and identify those. We've actually been working with the Mayor's infrastructure group on that integrated water management plan, and talking to Transport for London and other developers, so that every time they dig up the road, they're putting something different back. And that would be for flood and water quality. But I would say that the ease of the system of accounting for it and the benefits is probably easier in flood than it is in water quality.
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot of good work on the risk of surface water flooding and managing that. I think it's less clear how effective Thames Water is being in terms of its sewer overflows. So if you go to Maysbrook Park in Dagenham, and that was London's first climate change park, so the river was taken out of its narrow channel. It's never going to be big enough to swim in, and given more natural meanders and vegetation. So it looks lovely. But if you go up to the top of it, where it appears from underground, from under the streets, there's a big metal fence around it that is there to protect a nature reserve, but the gate is always open, so you go in, and quite often all of the vegetation in the Maysbrook is covered in sewage fungus. And there's, I've been there, and there's been sewage waste stuck to all the plants. And the sewer overflow is a little bit further back, underground, and it's where all of those pipes in that bit of Dagenham and Ilford converge. And when there's too much rain, it'll overflow and ends up in Maysbrook, in the park. And Thames Water isn't planning to use green infrastructure or sustainable drainage to relieve that. And you walked around those streets, and they're heavily paved. There's hardly any green space. So we're, in fact, we've done the opposite of making it resilient. We've maximised and made it the most efficient way of getting rain into the sewers as possible. So, of course, they overflow, and it's one of the biggest spillers in London. Similarly, if you've got the Olympic Park wetlands, and you've got a sewer overflow there, and that discharges about 55 times a year. And you go into that bit of Leighton, again, heavily paved, very little places for the rain to go, and Thames Water is planned to use a concrete storage tank to relieve that and not sustainable drainage. So you wouldn't get the additional benefit of reducing heat islands, improving air quality, making the spaces nicer. I mean, look what sort of places like Enfield have done in terms of creating sustainable drainage, not just to reduce surface water risk, but also to protect a lot of their rivers that they've daylighted. Then streets be transformed from kind of rat runs into a place where now people sit outside and have a coffee on that little street of shops. And it's also resolved the parking for van deliveries, so it's reduced that stress point as well. So the benefits are multiple, incredibly so. And if we just end up putting storage tanks under Dagenham, Ilford, wherever across London, then, and seemingly for all of those similar ones around London, sustainable drainage isn't being planned, then we risk spending a lot of money and not having very effective solutions that won't resolve the problem, because rain doesn't behave itself. If you can get it to fall in the same place every time, then fine. And that, then yeah, fine, use a storage tank. But Paris found out to its cost that, it built a big storage tank under Garda Austerlitz. It reconnected lots of pipes that were probably, old and dodgy connections, didn't use any green infrastructure. It rained. It's going to rain. Maybe if they had done all of that, plus created areas around Paris to hold the rain, they might not have moved the dates for the triathlon. So if all you do is build hard engineering without the green infrastructure, and even the Tideway recognises that they're going to have to do more and more to protect the legacy of the Tideway Tunnel, because we don't want to get to the point in 50, 60 years' time where it's spilling more because rain is overwhelming it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I'm just going to ask about obviously we're talking about swimmable rivers, and we've talked a lot about biodiversity, about making sure that there's also livable rivers for the wildlife within London. Are they both compatible with each other in terms of the solution? So if we improve the quality of the water for wildlife, is that also make it a swimmable river, or is there another step beyond that?
So obviously the work that we've been doing around the country on the, I suppose, traditional bathing waters on the beaches, what you've ended up with is needing tertiary treatment on the sewage treatment works and others, and then obviously trying to work out the storm overflows and agriculture. So, care does need to be taken, that you don't then, get to a point where the rivers, I can't believe it's ever going to be so clean that it would be like, obviously, you don't want to get it to a swimming pool where it's chlorinated and then you're completely, obviously, losing your biodiversity. So I think there's care that needs to be taken to make it as natural as possible, because that's what a river should be, as stated under law in the Water Framework Directive. And if you go back to those classifications, it's as near natural as possible. So I think care and balance needs to be taken. And I think, that there is, as I said before, there's always risks of swimming in natural water, and you need to be aware of those risks. And there will be times, like Paris, that you choose not to swim because there has been heavy rain, and there will be pollution, because it will be quite hard to remove all of that from discharging unless you create, big tanks, which none of us want to get to. So trying to find the right solutions as a package, I think, is the way forward.
I mean, so a few years ago, like I said, I'm a very bad swimmer, but I went swimming in the Thames with members of Kenwood Ladies Pond, and we had a great time. That was at Richmond. And I did water quality tests in the lead up to it and on the day, and it hadn't been raining for at least 5 days, and the water quality was excellent. So the Thames, when it doesn't rain, and not just sewer overflows, but stuff being washed off the roads, and the dog mess and stuff being washed off farms, and after 5 days, all the stuff that's been upstream has probably come through as well. So at the point that humans' impact on the river has gone because it's dry weather, then the river is healthy. And then it rains again, and then it dips. So that first stage is limiting and reducing our impact on rivers and being better custodians of it. In terms of, like Charlie says, in terms of creating rivers that are perceived of as our swimming pools. I'm not sure we want to get to that point. What they offer is an incredible opportunity for people to get close to nature and experience it and have quite a transcendental moment, where when we were swimming in the Thames Richmond, looking at Richmond Hill, it was incredible. And we chose a time when the tide was coming in, so it was cancelling out the river, so the river was essentially still. And so with the right information and the right sort of tech and apps, whatever else, then those opportunities are there for people.
Well, I think that's. I'm going to ask you because I think some of those questions some more questions on this subject will be asked, and certainly you've painted a picture in our heads of where we're all going to be going for a dip at Richmond, soon enough, looking up at the hill from above and the sun setting in the distance. So I'll pass on at that point to Assembly Member Roberts, who represents that area.
Do you feel there's been sufficient engagement with your two bodies, with the Mayor's Office regarding his plans for swimmable rivers?
So I've had lots of conversations with the Deputy Mayor and officials, and so trying to understand, what the plans are, what sits behind the manifesto pledge that they've made. But it would be good to see some more detail on exactly what those locations, what's intended at those locations. Will they get designated, put forward for bathing water status? And therefore, we would then monitor it, or are they going to do that themselves? What engagement might happen with the communities on what exactly they want and who might want to swim there, or is it actually about using the river, as we've been sort of talking about, rather than swimming? So it would be good to understand a little bit more about that.
Thank you.
I think it's very early stages, so it'll increase that outreach. There's a new kind of global movement now called Swimmable Cities, which is led by Matt Sykes out of Melbourne, where they want to make the River Yarra fully swimmable, and it's linked now to the sort of Plus Pools idea in New York, and they want to have a summit in Paris next year to build on the momentum that city has created. So we're a part of that. So I think engaging with that is important, and as Charlie said, that having that global perspective is good. Easy lessons to be learned, and greater kind of collegiate working is only going to be good, and it'll come down to the detail. So I think there's a lot to be filled in behind the big statements and the aspirations, and that needs to be done sort of thoughtfully and properly involving all communities, so it doesn't just superserve one section of society that would love more of that, but actually it's much more kind of comprehensive and integrated.
Thank you. And just considering all the discussions we've just had regarding drainage and runoff and all of the issues connected there, and your assessment of the current water quality in the places which were mentioned, including Teddington, and the frankly dysfunctional nature of Thames Water at the moment, do you think that this is going to be an achievable prospect in 10 years' time to have swimmable rivers in the capital?
I think it's good to say it. You've got to have that, look at the far horizon, and it's that moment of raising people's idea of what the possibility could be for their rivers. And so, it's easy to think about going swimming without actually going swimming. Mm-hmm. And it might terrify some people, but it sort of changes your perspective on things. And the times when I've been swimming the Thames and people have seen me, they've sort of gone, well, aren't you a bit mad? But no one said that I shouldn't be doing it, or that they felt that it was an inconceivable thing that just hadn't occurred to them. They're like, well, you could just get in. And upstream of Putney, you can. It doesn't mean it's necessarily safe, and there's the wrong time to do all sorts of things. But it allows that narrative to start, so it's taken beyond just lots of small groups who have been talking about it, and to involve more people. So I think that's to be welcomed.
Thank you, Annie.
And I think, having an ambition to improve the health of the water, waterways in London, what is bad about that? Surely that's a great thing, and that we should all get behind it. And as Theo says, initiatives like this drive everybody together in the same direction to achieve good. I just think that care needs to be taken. when encouraging people to swim in places that potentially are unsafe. So lots of work needs to be taken to get them to a place by 2030 that might be safe. So, it would take a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have loads of questions about land ownership, but frustratingly, as Chair, I have to keep things moving. Sandy Mama McCarthy.
Thank you. So I think what I've gathered is you think the leadership and the ambition from the Mayor is very welcome, but it's early days and you want to be fully involved in this going forward. And I think noting that the sites that have been mentioned have been raised as potential sites, but as you say, there needs to be a lot more work and engagement done on them. But I want to first of all ask Charlie, if I can, just some technical questions that I'm not quite sure about. So you monitor our rivers for their quality and river health, but then there is also, you assess bathing water quality at designated sites. Are those two regimes very different then?
Yes, so we're monitoring different things. Yeah. Under the Water Framework Directive, we're looking at the chemical as well as the physical state of the river, and that's looking at invertebrates, fish, and water plants, as well as then the physical state and chemicals. Whereas for bathing water, you're looking, E. coli, and understanding exactly what's present there with regards to sort of health risks around bathing.
And is one regime more intensive than the other? i.e., if you were testing rivers for bathing quality, which you don't do at the moment,
yes,
what implications does that have for you for your monitoring and your ability to do it?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not resourced to do that. And also, I think there's a misconception that, there's a lot of monitoring that happens across the country, and it's probably not as much, not as frequent along the river as you would expect. So, for instance, if anybody wants to go and swim in the River Thames, that would be, you'd need multiple sites to go and identify, because swimming...
Water flows.
Yes, it moves. And there are different issues depending on where you are with regards to agriculture, or whether you're near a road, or, So there's lots of issues to come into play. And designation as a bathing water doesn't necessarily you're going to, mean that you will meet bathing water standards. It just means that you will have that monitoring in place to understand the quality of what you're getting into.
Okay. So if the Mayor's ambition were to be realised, and we were to have new designated, if you like, bathing sites across London, there would need to be resources allocated for additional monitoring for those going forward. That's very helpful. At the moment, the Environment Agency is currently consulting on changes to bathing water testing. Can you just explain the reason for this, and will any changes that are being proposed at the moment improve quality or not?
Yeah, so it's actually DEFRA that's consulting on the bathing water regulations. And it's to, I suppose, catch up with the pace and ambition of people now wanting to get into, the waterways and cold water swim, etc. So there are a number of different things that DEFRA are looking at the moment. But I think the ones that are sort of most relevant for London is looking at the possibility of including a feasibility of improving the site's water quality. So is it actually feasible to get it to a bathing water status that's safe, obviously? There were originally fixed dates for monitoring of the bathing water season based on original sort of beaches and people going swimming during the summer season. So that would that's being consulted on, and whether you could adapt those dates depending to the local need. So, for example, in London, in Hampstead and Serpentine, people are swimming through the year, and then also to look at whether you use the broader sense of the word bathers, so that it includes water users in general, rather than swimming of people getting in to swim. There's some other things that are being consulted on that I don't think is quite as relevant here.
Okay, lovely. And can I also ask both of you, are there any other environmental or chemical hazards in rivers that are not currently monitored by the bathing water testing that we would need to consider?
So through the Water Framework Directive, we monitor a whole raft of chemicals, and I think it's important to remember that obviously, London is an industrial city. It has a lot, a huge industrial past, and so what we're seeing through the Water Framework Directive sampling that we do is that that there are a lot of chemicals sitting in the sediment that get brought up into the water, and I think understanding exactly what they will mean for bathers is an important part of that suite that we don't normally measure for from a bathing water point of view. That's mainly focused on E. coli.
Okay, thank you. And then, Theo, if I can ask you, you earlier mentioned, as has Charlie, about the health risks of E. coli, but are there any other risks that either bathers or water users can get from swimming in polluted waters? We regularly see, for example, the kayakers complaining that they feel sick as well.
I mean, they test for E. coli and enterococci because they're easy to detect. Yeah. And they indicate that there'll be sewage. I mean, in some cases, so like, for example, at Serpentine, that has a lower rating than the other sites in London at status because of the swans and the geese. And their excrement has E. coli in it, and so that will raise that level. But generally, it's a good way of determining whether there's sewage pollution, but it may be other things within that are making people sick, so parasites or, that are multiple, but finding those is very hard, so you go for E. coli and enterococci. Vars disease, which isn't related to sewage, is a risk. That's on rat urine. Rats get a bit of a bad rap for that. It's any animal urine could harbour the bacteria. So not having open cuts and washing your hands is very important, particularly if it's still water, but it doesn't have to be. Anywhere where there have been rats or other animals, it could be present. So raising an understanding of what the risks are is all part of that conversation that we should have. I mean, it's interesting, and I agree that most of the changes that have been suggested for the new bathing water destinations are important to modernise it and make it wider, so it's not just swimmers. It's interesting the possibility that, in terms of looking at, could it achieve a better water quality or not, whether you give it designated bathing status. So, and that would be if it's, could it reach sufficient? So you can either have excellent, down my notes, good, sufficient and poor. So if it falls below sufficient in terms of the number of E. coli or enterococci colonies within that, then after 5 years, it will lose its bathing designation if it's 5 years in a row. So that's looking to get rid of, because it can obviously take longer than 5 years just to rectify that. But if there's not a prospect of it meeting sufficient, then potentially it would never get bathing status under these proposals. I looked at the map today on the SWIMPO, which is the Environment Agency's water quality testing map, and all of the new river sites are poor status. That includes the two on the Thames, at Wolvergate and Wallingford. So they potentially would never have been given bathing water status if this change gets made. So there's a big discussion to be had. Are we happy with that? That would potentially see no river sites given bathing status, because they pretty much, all the ones so far that have been, are poor. So, or do we want to see increased investment to raise them? And what would that investment look like? And how would it also be, helping nature as well as providing benefits for people? So they're complex discussions, but they need to be, because at the very least, they're going to be expensive.
Yeah, but we need to try at least. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I think you've sort of touched on this already, Theo, and you probably have us too, Charlie. Currently, the only locations in London designated as bathing sites are ponds, as we've discussed, and there are, as you've already discussed, sections of the river that you think could. So are there sections of the river in London that you think should be added to the Environmental Agency's formal bathing water testing? Yeah, I mean, I hope in light of what you've just said, I'm not sure there are, but.
Well, I don't think the Royal Docks is, for example.
No, I mean, I'd say that if you're going to do it anywhere, do it at the places like the Royal Docks, Beckenham Place Park, Surrey Quays, that have come online quite recently, as some of them, as places to swim. Get an understanding of who's using those. Are they people that were, are they new to open water swimming in terms of, you know, say, at Beckenham Place Park, where a golf course was turned into a park and a bathing area made? Or is it people who have always been doing it, just at other places, maybe travelling further? So I think we need to understand the existing clientele or people that are using those, and with that information, base policy decisions on that. I don't think there are any. I mean, yeah, like I said, I went swimming at Richmond. There's Hurst Park in West London. People do swim at that. Some people swim in Hammersmith and around Putney. But currently, those places wouldn't get bathing water status because they're not used by enough people. And that fundamentally is the main criteria. Water quality doesn't figure in the discussions or the assessment, really. It's the number of people and the amenities in terms of toilets and parking and things like that.
Thank you. And finally, Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you. So just quickly on that was, other than the quality of the water, were there any other considerations that need to be given in terms of choosing an area to be swimmable, or swimmable water-based activity going forward?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to everything that Theo just said, you know, getting in and out of the water safely and knowing that you can get back out. So especially, you know, if you were considering the Thames, you know, there is quite a high current. So you need to know that wherever you end up. And a lot of that is, again, you know, so whether you're a paddleboarder or a swimmer, you know, there are some basic things that you always do. You go in up, you know, against the stream, so that then you come back to the place where you started under less effort. So, you know, just some general safety features like that. And I think the PLA actually have some guidance around that of how you get in and out the river safely.
That'd be great if you could send that over to us or share that with us. And I mean, one particular site in my constituency of Ruislip Lido, which I remember going to as a child, swimming in it, but also water sports going on in the backdrop, and actually that's been closed from a symbol point of view for quite some time. Why would somewhere like that not necessarily be on the radar of any of the sites that have come up so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's that, what do local people think? How much appetite is there for that to be brought back on? I mean, was it blue algae it had problems with and that sort of thing? So the more issues you have, the more that kind of keenness to do it is eroded with people. So it's less and less likely you wouldn't want to go in there to get covered in stuff or get ill. And so that, as I say, that culture disappears in terms of being something that, you know, within living memory, that was a place, and what a fantastic resource that was. So there is a Lido movement, you know, some have been brought back online, and why not? I mean, because a lot of it also comes down to proximity. So if you live up in Ruislip, then getting to the Thames is going to be more expensive than just getting one local bus to where you live, or walking to it, or cycling to it. So it has to be inclusive, you know, and that's looking at opportunities spread out across London. The Thames gets a lot of the attention, but that doesn't necessarily serve the wider population in the outer boroughs.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our Q&A for the first panel. Thank you both so much, both Theo for your first time here, and Charlie, certainly not your first time here as a veteran. That was incredibly helpful from you both. We're now going to take a 5-minute break, so we'll be back at 3:20 with a quick comfort break. Adjournment. Welcome back, everyone, to today's second part of Environment Committee meeting into swimmable rivers. I'd like to welcome our guests for the second panel. We're joined by Professor Caroline Sculls, Professor of Technology and Society at Brunel University, Philip Brownlee, Head of Public Affairs for Swim England, Ben Seal, the Head of Access and Environment Paddle UK, and by Nathaniel Cole from the co-founder of Swim Dem Crew. Welcome to you all, and thank you very much for joining us. I'll kick off with the first question, which is for everyone, as way of introduction. What are the experiences of Clean Water Sports Alliance member organisations of the health impacts of unclean river water in London, and do the health risks differ by sport? And Professor Caroline, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to join the Assembly this afternoon. I think, of course, the immediate thing that comes to mind when we talk about the health risks and the impacts and the prospective impacts is it comes to do with, I suppose, in terms of the immersion of time and time you spend in the actual water. So going back to what the previous panel members were discussing, both Claire and Theo, we were talking about levels of E. coli, we were talking about levels of blue-green algae that came into the conversation, Weil's disease, etc. So I think in terms of the actual exposure, of course, in a way it's kind of common sense, isn't it? If you're walking alongside a river, you are less exposed as if you are maybe paddling on top of the river and not falling in too much, hopefully, as opposed to then swimming in a river. So there's different levels of exposure, and I suppose from the work I'm aware of, that is the main, if you're immersed into a river with, for example, E. coli, and you have these open cuts, etc., then, or you swallow the water, you're at greater exposure in those particular ways.
Thank you. Philip.
Thank you. Yeah, as Caroline said, so some of the sort of more common things we hear from swimmers would be infections, whether that's chest, throat, ear infections, sickness bugs, gastroenteritis, that kind of thing. So they can be quite serious to a point, but I think it's also important to keep in context and perspective. You know, there was a survey by Outdoor Swimming Society of over 1 million outdoor swims across the country, where only about 1 in every 9,000 swims resulted in some kind of ill health. So it is a real problem, and it is a problem we should be very mindful of, but we shouldn't lose track of the massive health benefits of going swimming that outweigh the risk of getting sick while doing it.
Nicely said. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for inviting us. I'm really pleased to be able to be on the panel. And I'd echo what Phil says. There's quite a mixed opinion, really, from our communities, especially those who are on the water and those who are in the water, and how you engage with it. It does vary. You know, we have the same, as Phil's talked about, people reporting sickness, infections. It's very difficult to draw a direct line between being in the river and having that sickness. It could be from what you've eaten. So it's actually really hard to put a number on how many people are getting sick as a result. But we've got lots of anecdotal kind of examples of where people have talked about that. I think one thing that Phil was quite right to talk about sort of context. One thing we need to remember is that rivers traditionally they've not been clean. You know, these aren't mountain streams, these aren't glacial mountain rivers. We talked about Weil's disease in the last session and things like that. Paddlers, swimmers, rowers, we're used to dealing with unclean water. Basic hygiene, cleaning our kit, looking after ourselves. So it's not something that is unfamiliar, but I think what we've experienced in the last certainly 2, 3, 4 years is a real heightened awareness from the community and a fear, whether that's a real fear or a perceived fear of what's in the water, because more data is now available. People are more aware of the pollutants that are in there. Maybe 5 years ago, you know, I was preparing for this, I've talked to a few local outdoor centres and clubs and rowing clubs, and probably didn't see water quality as the biggest issue that they were facing. You know, local authority cuts are probably, you know, higher on their agenda, but actually water quality wasn't the thing that was. But now they've got parents calling up. They're having to brief their coaches. They're having to build into their normal operating procedures ways of. They're having to test the water and prove. So actually, there's a real genuine fear there. And that really seems to have been sort of intensified probably since COVID. Maybe people are more aware of their health, maybe they're, you know, breathing clean air and having clean water and cleanliness and hygiene. And so it really is quite acute now, and organisations like ours, and I won't speak for Swim England, but I know that the water sports, we're all starting to see our membership being hit by people who are frightened of going in the water. and who have seen, I think it was referred to as a doom cycle earlier on, in the media around how unclean, how dangerous our rivers are, how unsafe they are, they're full of sewage. But actually, we have to keep in context that rivers have never been clean. We just need to keep ourselves safe, but we also need to give people good information to help them make good choices.
Thank you. I often think parents calling up will make anything happen. Nathaniel, from your point of view.
Thank you for having me as well. I think obviously I speak from a fairly unique perspective as an urban swimmer or swimmer from the city. So while swimming is one of the most popular sports in the country or pastimes, along with walking and football, it's not necessarily concentrated. Open water swimming isn't concentrated in cities for understandable reasons, because our rivers are not swimmable or bathable, however we want to describe it. So in terms of exposure to potential harm, where we exist as that 1 in 9,000. And I understand that our rivers aren't supposed to be clean necessarily, but I think why we're here is because they could be, right? And one day they can be, whether that's in 10 years or less. So I think my experience is me and my swimmers go into swimming with the expectation to feel ill, and there's all the old wives' tales of what to do afterwards and stuff. But I think I'm in the business of creating swimmers, and that is one thing that we struggle with is the fear of getting sick and stuff. So I think, on the other hand, people do need more access to information on how to protect yourself. But I think there is something about, someone like me, I'm 34 years old, I'm fairly fit, I can afford to get sick, essentially. And it's not always like that for everybody else. So I think maybe we just need more information on how to keep ourselves safe. Because it's one thing for me to create new swimmers and encourage people to the water, but they need to feel confident that they can do that safely and not have to essentially weigh up their health alongside it, which is kind of maybe because of the doom news cycle of what we're calling it. They're thinking, well, if I swim, I will get sick. But I know that River Lee was mentioned earlier. It's my local river that I grew up with, and my hope is for the future that one day that river will be swimmable, but at the moment it does not exist as that. So for me, and earlier on Gareth mentioned that, I think it was Gareth you mentioned that open water sites in London that are mentioned as swimmable sites are all kind of closed off bodies of water, essentially, like our ponds and such. So yeah, I think I would just love us to be able to swim in more places, and for those places not to be kind of controlled bodies of water and more open like our rivers.
Thanks, and I love you pushing the urgency, Nathaniel. Can I just check with you? You said that your swimmers go with the expectation of getting sick, but Philip was saying that lots of people don't get sick. Anecdotally, what's your experience of your swimmers? Are people getting ill?
I would say it's probably less so. It's weird because in the summertime, more people go swimming, so more people in the water can also raise the chance of spreading bugs like that we just carry as people, for instance. So I'd say depends on the time of year. If it's been raining, like autumn and winter time, more likely to get sick. And in summertime, is when more people want to swim. But I'd say maybe half of us would get sick in the summertime versus more of us expecting to get sick towards when it's colder. And there's obviously more factors affecting it, like rain, runoff and stuff like that.
Thank you. Assemblymember Macartney.
Just a quick question. Can I ask where you go swimming? Is it in the designated areas, or do you go elsewhere as well?
So we go in designated areas in London. So typically it will be Beckenham Place Park, Hampstead Ponds, and then mostly pools because we're from the city. And then when we go out, we've gone to, more recently, we've gone to like Frensham Ponds and stuff, which again, in ponds, more controlled, just cleaner in general. Yeah.
Thanks. Assemblymember Roberts.
Thank you. Good afternoon. There's a consultation currently taking place regarding changes to bathing water regulations. Do you support the changes which are being proposed? And are there any other things which are needed? This is really for Swim England and Paddle UK.
I'm happy to start, and then Ben can jump in with that a bit. So I think the recognition that the current bathing water regulation system isn't fit for purpose is definitely one we feel strongly, so we welcome this chance to change it. I think there are elements in there that can be really positive. There are elements that have the potential to be positive but have the potential not to be positive, depending on which direction it ends up going in. But I think the potential to include other users that are not just swimmers in it is absolutely right. We strongly support that. It's absolutely just as valid for a paddler, a rower, whoever, than just a swimmer. I think the potential to expand get rid of the sort of season and to expand that to around has potential to be positive. It is more all year round testing to reflect how these waters are actually used. But equally, it could go the other way. They said, actually, we're going to test it less often now. Rather than a 20-week period, we're actually going to test it for a 10-week period, and that would be negative. So that's where, it depends how it ends up. But in theory, that's a positive, because if it's all genuinely year-round, that's a step forward. I don't know if there's anything you want to add in there, Ben?
No, we're in the process of putting together a Clean Water Sports Alliance joint response, and we'll put in our individual sports responses as well, so that we can articulate anything sport specific. But we support, like Phil says, the proposal to expand the bathing season in principle. We support the multiple testing sites, so it's not just a single site. There's more sites being tested. We, in principle, support the proposal to remove the automatic de-designation after five years, and I think we also support that broadening the term bathers. I actually, sorry guys, but I think there's a bit of a branding issue sometimes when we talk about swimmable rivers, or it's actually a recreational site or recreational river, because. Sorry, guys. But swimming, is one activity amongst many that happens in the water space. So I think that broadening of the definition would be really welcome. I think it's also worth just mentioning as well the OAP report, which came out 2 days afterwards, and there's lots more in there than is mentioned in the actual consultation itself. Things that we support, and actually take an example from around the world, and there's lots to dig into in that report that we would support and would justify further discussion, I think. So
yeah, thank you. The problem about just seeing this through the lens of swimmable rivers is something which we have grappled with in this committee already.
If I could jump in, obviously swimming is the best, though, we all agree on that, but there are other sports. but I think 2 points. There are some concerns around, which mentioned in the previous session, around the possibility of, if it's deemed that it can't get up to satisfactory standards, is that a reason for just not submitting? I think I'd have real concerns around that. I think it becomes a get-out-of-jail card that the powers that decide can kind of be like, I'll never get that, I'm going to get there, it's too hard, it's too expensive. Unless that's really clear and transparent what the criteria are to make that decision, it's hard for recreational users, often voluntary local groups, who are making these applications to sort of challenge that. So I think it could become just a blanket default for a reason to say no, which would be a concern there. And on the flip side to the argument around the automatic de-designation at 5 years, which we agree we don't support that, because we think often it can take more than 5 years to make those improvements. But there is an argument to say, if you take the River Wharfe in Ilkley, which was the first inland designated bathing water site, they feel they wouldn't have got that designation if there hadn't been the risk of it dropping off and not wanting the water company response, not wanting the bad press of losing the bathing water site. They felt that really accelerated the process to actually make the change happen. So there is things for us, but on balance, we think we wouldn't support the automatic de-designation, but there is an argument in certain circumstances that forcement to act can be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Assemblyman Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. This really is for Philip and Ben, but if anyone else wants to chip in, you're more than welcome. You may have heard me ask this question earlier, actually, and it's about currently there's only locations in London designated as bathing sites of ponds. And do you feel there are sections of the river that could be added to the Environmental Agency's formal bathing water testing?
I'll say, so I know Teddington was mentioned a couple of times, and I know there was a bathing application sort of underway by a local group there that then got paused because the whole process was shut down for a while temporarily. And so that's a site where they had the numbers, they had support from local council, they had support from the local MP. I think there's definitely sites that absolutely could. And as a general point, we'd like to see many more designated bathing water sites all over the country, but including in London. There's definitely scope to make some other stretches of water.
Okay, if I could ask, perhaps you could drop us a line on those locations you feel might. Do you have in mind some locations?
We would normally be guided by where water users are actually already doing it, and local community groups that are actually active and using these water spaces. But I'm happy we can reach out and provide.
Yeah, if you drop us a line, that'd be helpful. Do you think, Chair? Yeah, thank you. Ben?
I suppose what I would add is a slightly different spin on that, is that it doesn't have to have a designation, it doesn't have to have a bathing designation to be a recreational site. You know, paddlers, rowers, sailors, we're on the water, you know, and actually we participate in a slightly different way. So our needs are similar, but can be different as well. So actually the ability to have simple, basic access, physical access to the water, accessibility.
Here's a question for you, it's a random question. The River Cam, do people bathe in that, do you know?
In Cambridge, yeah.
Yeah, 'cause I know they do other things on it, obviously.
Yeah, there's sections along the Cam that people bathe in pretty frequently. Yeah, absolutely. So I think just seeing it through the lens of bathing waters is a bit narrow. Actually, can we create bathing water sites? Yeah, but can we create other recreational spots where people can do other sports, other activities, or still go swimming, but they recognise that isn't a designated spot, and you know they've got the information to make that decision themselves. So I don't think we should just only pigeonhole people into going to bathing water spots. As great as that is, we should look at, you know, in a bit broader sense.
Yeah.
If I can just come in there as well, I completely agree, and I think one of the things that I struggled with, I suppose, is what do we mean by swimmable? How are we actually defining that, and what are the kind of the tolerances where the Assembly are looking within that? I also think I completely agree with Ben. When we talk about outdoor swimming, we talk about swimming generally in spaces that are multiple use spaces. And again, understanding not just from the community side in terms of people who will prospectively use those spaces, but just having a greater understanding through conversation and sensitivities to and between the different stakeholders that currently are making use of the particular, whether it's rivers or ponds or whatever it may be. I just wanted to pick up as well in terms of the flip side of, you know, we spoke before about illness, etc., but actually the positives, and we may come on to this later, but in terms of understanding the multiple uses, in terms of understanding the threshold tolerances, in terms of, you know, some swimmers go in and getting swimmer's rash or swimmer's ear, or, you know, these are just kind of hazards of the experience, as it were, whereas other people find that they're very apprehensive within it. So again, it's about understanding this range of use, the range of tolerances, the range of kind of qualities and what that means, but also really importantly, the health benefits of being in water are huge. The mental health, the physical health benefits. We'll probably come on to that later, Chair. But again, just to add another perspective on that.
Do you want to add anything? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Assembly Prince. Nathaniel, if I can come back to you. So speaking as someone who's a bit of a wimp and the idea of jumping into the water, I love it, but also terrified. What kind of information do you need before you get in the water to know that it's going to be safe? And is that information accessible to you at the moment?
If I think before all of that, it's one is about having the skills to get into the water. So I'm in the business of teaching people how to swim as well. So one is about being able to swim in deep water or swim against the current, absolute worst case. And then second is having the right gear. So there's some people who use different tabs to like clean water afterwards and like have their own process to be safe afterwards, for instance. But yeah, for river swimming, I haven't made use of the new map yet, for instance, of designated swim spots, because we always know our local areas. And we're lucky enough to, in London, the places that are open water swims venues are staffed. So I think we kind of have that disconnect that other communities might benefit from, where it feels a bit more natural in terms of being able to walk or drive up to their local swim spot and go for a swim. Ours is a bit more regimented, of booking online, having to have a staff member there for safety reasons, which obviously benefits us. But yeah, they need to know that venue's open for service on the day, because some of them are seasonal, for instance. And yeah, just being able to access it.
Thank you. Caroline, if we can come to you, so what steps do you think need to be there, both in terms of water quality and are there other conditions that need to be assessed to? And in your opinion, can people get hold of that information at the moment? Sorry, that was 3 questions, but I'll repeat it.
We can take them each in turn. I agree with the points that both Ben and Phil have said around water quality, and obviously I referred just earlier to that. I think one of the things that when it comes to water quality, we know that there is a lot of fear. We know that there is a lot of anxiety around at the moment. 15,000 people on the streets of London in November is kind of testament to that. The need for action and the need for change. So it's really wonderful that we're talking about this now with you. I think quality is not just around the actual kind of what is going on in the water. So last panel, Claire mentioned around kind of the biodiversity and the habitat diversity and the quality of health there. It is about what is in the water, but there is also that kind of almost in-between space about the perceptions, and Ben, you referred to this earlier, the perceptions of water quality, the trust behind the data, the trust behind the reliability of the data, the lived experiences that other people have had. Yes, because it ranges from everything from people who are like, I would never do that, absolutely ever, right to the people who, like Nathaniel and myself, swim all year round. You know, so again, there's a whole range of issues around the quality itself. I may have forgotten your second question, but I'll come to the last one. You can remind me of the second one. Around the comms and the access to information, we are seeing a plethora of different ways to be in water at the moment, to be in water, to be near water, to be on water. Everything from what's coming up on social media and influencers and, everything that is going on there that, let's face it, some of that and a lot of it, we do not know the depth, the quality, the reliability, the significance of what it is that they are sharing. Right through to, we have some wonderful publications like Outdoor Swimmer magazine, who will run articles and provide insight and hints and tips and, right through to groups like Nathaniel's. I also co-host for Mental Health Swims at Frensham, funnily enough. So again, having people who are knowledgeable to take people into water. But the other point as well is, we also have a whole host of people who are open water swimming coaches, and they are fully qualified. People. I can name several people like Gilly MacArthur, etc., who they are. Their role is as open water coach. So I think in terms of communication, we've got the communication, that understanding the risk and the safety and feeling that reassurance. But we can do that in a whole range of different means, a whole range of different measures, some of which I've just discussed. The other thing around communication, I don't know if we're going to come on to this later or not, but is actually how communities who currently do not engage with water. I came off at West Silverton, DLR, and I walked through. One of the things that really struck me was walking through, and there was laughter, and there was children laughing, they were playing, but everything seems to focus away from the river, the architecture, the function of the river. And so I was then thinking about the comms and actually involving, and this comes through, so my colleague Catherine Kelly from the University of Brighton and myself were working with the Environment Agency on the Blue Space Forum Health and Inequalities report. And one of the things that really came through there is the need to communicate lived experiences of communities who are already or would like to or potentially would benefit from engaging in rivers and outdoor swimming.
Thank you. Assembly Member Mahfouz is going to pick up on that in a second. Ben and Philip, I'm going to ask you the same question in a moment about assessing risk of water quality. Just before that, Caroline, you've said a few times that there are huge health benefits to engaging with the water, and I don't think any of us do have a question about that. So I just want to, do you have a 60-second pitch about why people should get involved with the water? Absolutely. It is proven. So there's a whole series of researchers who are working on this. People like Kate Moles, Ronan Foley, people like Heather Massey, Catherine Kelly. And we've just had the first open outdoor swimming recreation forum. So the research now is really showing the positive health benefits are around, increased endorphins, dopamine, etc. We know this is good for us. It will promote positive mood.
It will reduce heart rate, blood pressures. We know that swimming in outdoor spaces, as well as indoors, I will say that, Phil, but in those spaces, it reduces anxiety. There is currently a fantastic NIHR project that Dr. Heather Massey is running with Hannah Denton that looks at the way in which we can use open water swimming as a means of addressing depression and alleviating those types of mental health issues. So again, there's a whole range there, let alone, I've probably gone over my 60 seconds, but let alone the physical health benefits of that. The physical health benefits, looking at pain relief, looking at addressing issues, say, for example, around fibromyalgia, looking at improving heart health, looking at overall mobility and health around, our joints and our movements, and therefore reducing proneness for frailty, for example. Again, there is research that is showing this whole physical and mental health benefits that, so whilst your first question was all about, what is the impact in a potentially more negative way, actually, in my opinion, and I'm sure the opinion of many others, the physical and mental health benefits that we experience from blue space, as well as green space, and often these are combined, far, in many, many cases, far outweigh.
You're very persuasive. Maybe I'm not such a wimp, and I'll be in the river.
You should come and swim.
I love it. And Ben, so just to come back to you, so the question essentially was around when people are paddling or whatever sport they're doing, how do they assess for water quality? Are there other things they should be assessing, and do they currently have access to that information?
Okay, so how do people assess water quality? Until recently, it was very difficult to know what was happening in our water. The access to data was really poor. We were basing our decisions on annual sewage discharge information, and that was completely useless. How many of us checked the weather, what it was a year ago, and that was what we had. It was only a couple of weeks ago that we've now got a national discharge map that Water UK have developed, that enables us to see when discharges are happening. And it's not perfect. It doesn't tell us load and duration. Sorry, it does tell you duration, but from that we can make more informed decisions. But it's not perfect. It doesn't tell us the water quality. It just gives us part of the jigsaw on which we can make a more informed decision. What clubs are having to do, what providers are having to do, hire providers, possibly people like yourself who are delivering activity, they're having to take upon that themselves to test the water, and that's costly and it's time consuming and it's difficult, and with all due respect, we're not scientists. I live in Derby, and I know that obviously that's quite a way away from here, but I've done some testing, bacterial testing. The turnaround was 5 days to get the results back, and then you get some numbers back, and then you have to wait for a good 10, 12 results to actually see a pattern in it. I could go and test the water today, and it could tell me something, and that's just today. So actually, the whole process of testing is quite difficult for private citizens and non-scientists to do. So we're still a little bit in the dark. Having said that, technology's coming on fast, and there are new methods to test. But still, it's costly, it's time-consuming, it's expensive, and so we're still basing our decisions on incomplete data. Couple of people who got in contact with me before this session, Fulham Reach Rowing Club tested last week, and it was their words to me in the email were that it was off the scale, the highest I've ever seen. There's other clubs who are testing other different things, and again, it's all just trying to piece together bits of the jigsaw. But I think that it's difficult and it's incomplete, and so we're basing our decisions based on what information we have to hand, which is better than what we had 3, 4, 5 years ago, but it's still not a brilliant basis on which to get a full informed information.
Yeah, I was in Hastings the other day. I met a group of women who were doing citizen science, testing the water there, and I was just amazed how much of a faff it is. It just really did take a long time. Philip, it's difficult going after everyone's kind of inputted, but do you have anything to add?
Well, I do. It might be slightly repetitive, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to say how great swimming is, so I feel like I forget nothing else, actually. I need to say that. But so to touch the point, swimming did a value of swimming report, or 2 value of swimming reports that looked into the health and wellbeing benefits of swimming. It showed it saved 78,000, prevented 78,000 cases of ill health each and every year, social value of £2.5 billion, and the health benefits of outdoor swimming, open water swimming, were twice that of indoor swimming, which is in itself brilliant. But there is additional benefits to doing it out in the natural environment as well, which is something to be celebrated and cheered. On the information point, I think Ben's covered it largely. You know, local groups are really knowledgeable about their stretch of water. They know their patch of water. If they're going in all the time, they're the best people to speak to about what's happening with their bits of water. They can track it over time. But there is a lack of sort of official data, which has driven more and more into having to go down a citizen science route. So, for instance, the group at Teddington who are pursuing the bathing water application, they've been testing the water there, which had showed, going back to some of the comments made in the first point, that broadly, if it's dry, fine results, absolutely fine. But then a spike when it rained, which is probably indicative of what we see across most of London, but we just don't have the data to show that at the moment. That's the point we want to get to. I think Ben also touched on, there are advances coming in the water testing arena area that can get much quicker return rates, because previously for E. coli and enterococci, it tended to be send it off to a lab, 2 days later you get results back, which can be, you know, isn't that useful if you want to go for a swim. But there are methods now that can get answers within, you know, hours rather than days. So that's definitely progress in that space we want to see rolled out and made available to more people. But there is no, should it be the role of citizens to have to do this? There should be other bodies doing that. Right.
Well said, thank you. Assembly Member Matthews.
Thanks, Chair. And Caroline, you started talking about lived experiences feeding into encouraging people to swim. So I want to move to Phil and Nathaniel about what barriers people are facing in terms of ability to swim within London, and particularly if you could focus on ethnic minorities. Maybe Nathaniel's. Yeah.
Thanks, great question. So one thing we're seeing more recently, actually, as I was on my way here, is one is leisure providers changing hands. So we're going from, you know, councils are taking them back in-house, like Southwark and Tower Hamlets, which on one hand I'd say is good, but on the other hand it does, like for instance at London Aquatic Centre, going from one provider to another, it means that if someone's got a membership for that provider, then they can't go there if it's changed to a new one, or they have to get another membership on top. So I mentioned that because there are financial barriers to swimming. Typically prices for swimming for an adult like myself might be between £4.50 and £7.50 for a session, depending on where I go. And I think while we might feel like, you know, the group I'm from, which is black and mixed races, while it is a growing population in the UK, we are still not necessarily have as much disposable income as other groups. You know, we're more likely to inherit debt more than anything. So there is the financial barrier when it comes to people of colour getting into swimming. Also, there's a cultural barrier, so we are not, or people of colour more broadly speaking, aren't known as swimmers or thought of as swimmers. I've always said you don't go to Jamaica and say, why does everyone run here? You just like celebrate that they run, because that's what we do. I work with teenagers a lot, and a lot of teenagers do football and basketball, but swimming isn't a part of their repertoire of sports, because it's thought of as a sport beyond a life-saving skill. So I know there's been research to get more black and Asian and ethnic minority people swimming, but it's about us shifting the culture, so swimming looks like something that people of colour and black and Asian ethnic minority people should do for the benefits of our health, our quality of life and so on, but at the moment it doesn't exist as that. Like, we might look to football for those things or other communal activities that are outside to do those things, which is why we exist at SwimDem Crew, to get more people of colour swimming and learn. That's why we teach them how to swim and do our social sessions to improve people's mental well-being as well. So you're facing financial barriers, cultural barriers, and yeah, I think people are just not thinking of swimming as something for them because of how they've been brought up or what they see on the TV. They might really only be exposed to swimming from every 4 years at the Olympics, for instance. So yeah, that's why I've been going for 11 or 12 years to try and change what the perceptions of a swimmer is and can look like.
Yeah, if I make a couple points on that front, I think SwimDem Crew are a great example. People doing absolutely fantastic work. Black Swimming Association, Black-owned swim schools, the whole groups of organisations out there doing, you know, really fantastic work in this space, because there is a huge amount of work to do to change that perception so that people think, and for swimming to change to be genuinely inclusive and welcoming for everyone, as once we say everyone can enjoy all the benefits that we've talked about. I think you only have to look at the statistics from the Active Lives Children's Survey to see, you know, if you're a kid in Richmond, it's like 81% can swim, it's 40-something in Brent. If you look at for white British children in years 7 and 8, it's over 80% can swim, but if you look for black children in year 7 and 8, it's below 50% again. If you look at children from the poorest backgrounds, about 30-something%, richest over 80% again. So there's huge inequalities and discrepancies there. And the point around cost is so important. But then I know this is swimmable rivers, but if we just move to the indoor world for a second, like, we have to appreciate what's going on for leisure operators there, where for every £4.50 or £7 they're charging them to go in, it's costing them per swimmer well over £10. You know, they're subsidising everyone that walks to that facility because the cost of running these is so high and all the pressure on local authority budgets. So if we want swimmable rivers and people to swim, we have to protect the indoor arenas where most of them are learning to swim as well, which is under a lot of stress at the moment. But I appreciate that's not the purpose of today's investigation, but it's important to note, I think.
Well, sorry, maybe I can bring you in on this bit as well, Caroline. So, I mean, you've both obviously raised the financial aspects, and in relation to obviously outdoor swimming, certain locations there isn't a financial cost of going swimming. So actually, there's potentially an opportunity to break down that barrier by introducing more outdoor spaces. Obviously, depends on how they're managed and what have you. But do you feel that is an opportunity that, in terms of removing that barrier? Perhaps I'll go to you first, Caroline.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that, because that was one of the things I was going to say, was one of the opportunities, and a real opportunity we have here, is that in actual financial costs, a lot of spaces are free to access. For example, the spots that I take swims in, again, it's free to access. There will be a car parking charge, for example, but generally it's not like an official kind of formal space where you have to pay for entry. So again, there's a whole range there. The other thing that I just wanted to come back to is that, again, it's Nathaniel, you raised that point about perceptions of swimming. For example, within organisations like Mental Health Swims, we talk about dips, not distance, because actually you will get as much benefit from just dipping into cold water or being in water than going and doing lengths up and down, you know, a pool, or going and doing a 1K circuit and being part of a kind of a group of people who that's what they want to do. And I think that's the other thing. It's recognising, when we talk about access, when we talk about inclusive swimming, and the Black Swimming Association have got this fantastic initiative around inclusive aquatics. You know, so it's about actually understanding what we mean by that. Is for some people it's literally going in, and we see them all the time. They go in, they dip, they squeal because it's so cold, and they get back out again, and that is brilliant. It's so good. But then for other people, it is about going, and actually they want to do more endurance swimming. They want to, you know, I myself have been in that particular space as well. So there's a whole range, and actually there's another opportunity, and again, it's just coming back to that cost and that finance point and access. We were talking earlier about the role that actually pool swimming has to facilitate a transition into and build a confidence for swimming in non-kind of controlled environments in that sense, because, you know, it takes a lot of confidence to move into those spaces. So I probably got distracted there. The other thing just to note as well, research in terms of the health, children who swim and engage with blue spaces early in their childhood are less likely to develop mental health issues. Because again, they will have that confidence, they will have that experience where they can retain this as a lifelong skill. So those statistics that I keep calling you Ben, sorry Phil. The statistics that Phil has shared are really vital to be brought into this debate and discussion.
Yeah, I mean, part of the drive behind this really is about that social justice, accessibility, opening up. This is, as I think you've all said, it's a life skill, as well as the fun aspect that you've talked about there, Caroline, the reasons why people are sort of drawn to water, because actually it can be so much fun, whether it's bath time or getting into a much bigger pool of water to enjoy what it has to offer. But what can we do to be encouraging more Londoners to learn how to swim and then taking it up?
I think it's about finding those trusted voices. You know, swimming aren't always going to be the best friend to go and tell people to swim, because if you don't have a relationship with swimming, why do you care what swimming is going to say, right? So, you know, we need to find those voices that can talk authentically to people and make it relevant to them. And then there's an obligation on us as the governing body and operators, etc., to make sure that once people do come, it's a positive, welcoming, inclusive experience, and those places are set up to cater for people with different requirements, different cultural sensitivities and things like that. So I think there's so much work for everyone to do in that space, but I think, it starts by making it relevant and talk to people trusted voice that they want to listen to.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I exist as one of those many trusted voices that has been in the industry for a long time. I think there's a difference between when you're teaching kids versus adults and men and women as well, because of those. It's not always just cultural barriers, but sometimes mental barriers of, like, you know, the stories we tell ourselves are important. If someone believes they cannot swim, then they won't. Or if they believe they cannot float, they won't. So yeah, I think. I don't really think we have a shortage of staff necessarily, of teachers that are willing, able and capable of getting people swimming. It's more of a pool programming point, like question when it comes to teaching people how to swim. And when it goes to leisure providers or local councils and how they run their pools, because not sometimes pools are thought of, or I guess swim memberships and people booking onto lessons, it's more of a cash flow thing as opposed to the person physically being there. So in my experience when I was a full-time swim teacher, you know, we're happy to have people registered for a lesson, whether they come, like that didn't really matter, because it was kind of thought of like a gym membership. Like the best person to go to a gym is someone that pays but doesn't go, because they don't take up space, right? And I think sometimes lesson programs can be run like that, just because that's a part of life, right? So I think there also needs to be a concerted effort to make sure people are staying on their learning programs and they are signing up for lessons, because otherwise we're taking up space for other people that want to get involved. And yeah, I think it's just got to keep continuing pushing. I think we are in a good space right now, but I'm personally an advocate for more pools to exist. I know we lost a couple over lockdown, which was really awful, but we need more pools because eventually we'll have more places to swim, like in nature and rivers, and we need to get people kind of transitioned out of them into the natural world.
If I could come just to say, what we had witnessed from a sort of national point of view was a huge shortage in swimming teaching, which was proving a barrier, teaching numbers, which was proving a barrier to running lessons and for swim programs to grow and take on more children. They didn't have the teachers to do it. That's been a particular problem since COVID and the lockdowns. I think possibly exacerbated by changes to things like the minimum wage, which then make other jobs sort of comparable wages with less responsibilities, perhaps, which sort of had an impact. And I think some of the figures we'd seen was, on average, a cohort of coming through qualifying as swimming teachers to us within a year would be around about 8-9% from ethnically diverse communities, which is obviously way lower than we'd like it to be. So we'd introduced a recruitment academy, which was an initiative that removed the sort of cost barrier element, because it's quite costly to qualify as a swim teacher. And by targeting that, we saw that coming through that cohort was around 21% of people coming through the recruitment academies were from ethnically diverse communities, as a way of trying to do those steps to improve representation on poolside, which we'd understood from research we'd done, an England Swims piece of research we did looking specifically at ethnically diverse communities and talking to them, was particularly some communities not seeing people who look like them in the pool environment, in a swimming environment, was a massive barrier to them. They said that, going back to things of, it's not for us. And so trying to, as a step to remove that, okay, if we can sort of improve representation on poolside from the teaching, we can then hopefully start to drive improvement in representation in the pool itself.
And just finally, quickly, I guess, do you feel that there's enough action being taken to support young people to learn to swim, or do you feel that more action needs to be taken?
I'm going to have to go first. Absolutely more needs to be done. You only have to look at school swimming in this country is failing way too many children. Hence, we're getting the stats we're talking about. Theoretically, every child, it's on the national curriculum, by the end of Key Stage 2 in a Leeds primary school should be able to swim 25 metres. Every kid goes to school, right? So why are we not anywhere near 100% for that community? So clearly something is wrong in the school swimming system that is failing people. And that needs addressing again, not part of this inquiry, but that is absolutely something that needs addressing at the national level.
Thank you. Madam McCartney, sorry if I slightly stepped on your toes earlier. I didn't realise.
I think my question is to Professor Scars, and I think you've answered this primarily, is about the benefits of blue space. But is there any difference between the benefits of blue space and green space, or are they exactly the same?
It's a great question. It's a really good question. It could open up lots of discussions and possibilities for academic research, funnily enough. But I think at the moment we see some research that will say, for example, there was a survey done of 20,000 people in Nature, where there were blue space and green space, and those who were in the blue space, they actually experienced greater sense of well-being. Now, it's great. It's research that is moving in that direction. However, what I would personally, and this is me very personally, suggest is that actually both green space and blue space have got exceptionally strong benefits for mental and physical health. And actually, I think what we're seeing is we've seen a lot of research in recent years, not recent years, but in the last 10, 20 years, are focusing around green space, i.e. places and things where you don't get wet, or you're not kind of got the chance of being wet by falling in or whatever. And we know that is very good for you for the reasons that we talked about before. Research around blue space that exists absolutely echoes that. It absolutely echoes that. There are some differences around the heterogeneity of the use of blue spaces. Green spaces there, and people generally tend to use it all year round in a kind of more, people will walk their dogs every day. They will go for walks every weekend. They will, do whatever. Whereas with blue space, it tends to be a little bit more, heterogeneous, i.e., not everybody will swim like myself and my friends and many other people who love to swim in ice, because that's just what we love to do. But Zach's shaking his head. So there's greater heterogeneity and difference. However, what we are seeing is that there is, at this point in time, anecdotal evidence. There was another research piece that was done in New Zealand, which actually indicated that those respondents with views of the ocean actually had stronger mental health. So again, but there is a real opportunity to do even more research in this space. As an academic, I'm always going to advocate that anyway. But I think the other thing in terms of the benefits, just to come back to that, is that we often hear about the physical and mental health benefits of being in the water. But actually what happens when you get out the water, before you go into the water, and then immediately when you get out of the water, people develop friendships, communities, the social relationships that build around that, the opportunity that actually engaging with blue space has for reducing social isolation. We know that that is a big issue. The role that it can do to bring people together, whether that's on a beach or whether it's paddling or whether it's swimming or whether it's dipping, just the power of doing that as part of a community and building new friendships. We have and we are still experiencing the fallouts, in a sense, from the pandemic. We know that people are still experiencing isolation. We know that there is peaking mental health crisis. This is one way that actually we can really pull together. We've got organisations like Maggie Blagrove over in Bristol and the Open Minds Active. They are now doing social prescribing, working with refugee and asylum seekers, for example, bringing those groups of women in to, again, realise the benefits. So we've got so many wonderful pockets, and actually increasingly not so much pockets. We've got national organisations who are focusing on this, national charities and organisations. So I think it is, as Ben and Phil and Nathaniel have kind of alluded to earlier, it's how we can bring all this experience, the lived experience, the data, everything together so that we have got this far more holistic view. Because London can learn so much from what people are doing in Bristol, what people are doing all over the country. Again, there's a fantastic group up in the Lake District run by Gilly MacArthur called Blue Mound Men. Again, it's a men's Sunday morning, they call it the Sunday service. They go down every Sunday morning and and it started off with a handful. There are loads of them go now. So it's like a men in sheds, but for water. It's great. So, yes, sorry, I've shared a little much.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks. Assembly Member Tyrrell.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So just so to each you in turn, I suppose we'll work down the panel, starting with Caroline and working down. Touch upon goes on what was touched upon earlier, but what social and cultural barriers have you found that exist that limit access to river or river-based activities?
Yeah, this is really important. We talked before about ethnic minorities and perceptions of being in water and what that can mean. So there's a real opportunity there, for example, to speak to communities themselves. What are the current relationships with water? Do they only experience water when they go on holiday, for example, or if they take the kids to the beach for the day, or if they don't take the kids to the beach but they go for a walk along the river? So I think if we can understand those existing relationships within communities who are not currently represented within the blue space community, then it means that we've got the opportunity to build alternative ways to actually bring people into a space in ways that we've not thought about before. I'm very aware of my subjectivity as a person. I've got particular life experiences. I bring those life experiences to conversations, but my goodness, I'm also extremely open to think about how we could do things differently. So there's social cultural barriers in terms of perceptions. There's social cultural barriers in terms of actual physical access to. If we look at kind of urban populations and the demographics of urban populations, again, there's again a great diversity. And Nathaniel, you touched on this earlier when we were talking about differences in, levels of poverty, access to transportation, all of these types of things. They in and of themselves compound and contribute to the social cultural kind of barriers that exist. There is also, again, pertaining to mental health, a lot of people, when we talk about mental ill health, there are lots of phobias and anxieties and social anxieties and agoraphobias, etc., where all of these conditions need to be understood and supported. This is where organisations like Mental Health Swims, I know I'm biased, but Mental Health Swims is great. It's about everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome. We really, it's an open, trusted space. It's a safe space. But that's in the context of mental ill health and mental health support and prevention. And, whereas actually if we then begin to understand the different socio-cultural needs of our complex society, and we know there are many, then we can begin to tailor swim recreation-based solutions according to what the community needs rather than what we think we should tell them they need.
Yeah, I think Caroline said a lot of stuff I would agree with there. So I'll just add one more point, which goes back to my earlier point, was, well, one of the social cultural barriers to the thing is the ability to swim. That varies massively between different social, so that's a huge, huge immediate barrier to, are you going to go swimming if you can't swim? Well, probably not. So that's a huge barrier that needs to be addressed. And then just to echo what Caroline said to her points.
For people from those backgrounds. There's also religious concerns and modesty concerns, people who want to have privacy when they're getting changed, and maybe concerns around their hair and body and skin. There are all sorts of factors that are brought up in the research. I think one of the things that the way that we've addressed this, and again it's been touched on already, is and I hope within the Mayor's plan this is built in, is being able to have those interventions into the community to enable that are really community designed, community led, so that they can be designed for those communities. And where we've had success, just down with Poplar Harker, is the Awe and Explore programme, where it's been designed with that community and got a big group of, I think it's 70 females and 30 males out canoeing on the water. But it's been done sensitively to their needs and designed with them, and that's developed leaders and coaches out of that. So I think that to try and break down these barriers that the Black Swimming Association report highlights so well, it's really important that there are interventions that are designed at a community level to be tailored to meet the needs of those different communities and break those barriers down.
Thank you. So on one hand, I'll acknowledge and echo what's been said already about, obviously, if you can't swim, you're not going to go swimming. It's not an activity for you necessarily, and there not being many communities that currently exist in a broad sense to bring people to rivers, bodies of water. I think one thing that is probably makes sense to touch on in terms of a barrier for definitely diverse communities, for instance, or people of colour, or people like me, is the desire to essentially to be clean. And if we think about rivers and knowing that rivers aren't necessarily clean and they are dirty, it's like on one hand you've got desire to be clean, on the other hand you've got getting dirty. And they are very much at odds with each other, which is why I kind of alluded to, I guess, facilities and staffed places earlier on. So I think one is like doing an activity that's going to make you dirty, not in the sense that in the same way rugby does, for instance, can bring up a lot of feelings for people and communities and groups, which is why it's important to have people to kind of allay fears and give the right information for what's required afterwards and how to like prepare afterwards. So even when we swim at Beckenham Place ponds, for instance, my biggest gripe there is being prone to swimmer's itch, because I haven't even got a hose to just hose off afterwards. I have to take my own bottle of water to try and rinse off afterwards. That's just something that I'm just more conscious of, and maybe that's because of like my culture and my community and how I've been raised, right? And I think one thing, we did talk about, I guess, rivers and bodies of water being free to an extent, but open water swimming is a bit of a faff. So like needing a towel, a changing robe, if it's colder, wanting a wetsuit, all of that stuff is quite big. And like, I've come here on my bike, I wouldn't be able to fit everything I actually want to bring open water swimming with me. And considering I'm from London and we're in an urban area, maybe could fit on a big cargo bike or something, but not necessarily just in a backpack. So in summertime, it's fine. You essentially need less because you swim with less. But there is that idea of if you really want to like do it the way that people online might be doing it, you might need a bit more kit, and then that requires more from you, like a car and stuff, and we've not necessarily got access to those things. So I think, yes, dealing with the idea of like how to get clean is one aspect, as well as acknowledging the faff of it all and thinking of ways to reduce that faff for people.
Thank you for that. I must confess, the Beckenham Place pond is about 10 minutes from where I live, and until this meeting, it's never dawned on me that I don't know where the changing rooms are for that pond, giving the whole... It seems obvious, but it's something that's never crossed my mind. But to Nathaniel, what role do you think social and community activities have in making people feel welcome in blue spaces?
So at Swindon Crew, we are a community of people. We bring people together, using the water as a tool to empower people to change their lives. So people have come to Swindon and then got a new job, or quit their job, or left the relationship and then started a new one for the betterment of their life. So kind of speaking on what Caroline was mentioning earlier, is like, I think we build trust with people. We do that through, one, me just being me, because I'm a workshop facilitator, so I'm quite calming anyway. So I think the role we have is for showing people that blue space, green space is for you. Here's how you do it in your way, or here's how we do it, for instance. And I think it is, we've mentioned volunteers and community groups a lot, and I think when it comes to data and access testing, all these things are going to be people-powered rather than corporation or charity or agency-powered. So I think the role we have is by bridging that gap in knowledge, access and safety for people to then come in and be safe in the water. So, and then in the most basic sense, it's just that we exist as someone for that visual reference of, oh, you can do this too.
Can I just come in on that briefly? I think, the social side, and I really can't emphasise this enough, that social side of swimming, dipping, whatever it is that we talk about is absolutely crucial, both in terms of, after we take our swims, we always, oh my God, the most amazing hot chocolates, right? And you look on social media and it's like the cake is as important as the swim for some groups, and it's about what's being brought, the birthday celebrations that go on, the celebrations of life events that go on within these environments as part of community groups. But there is a flip side to that as well. A lot of people have expressed to me, and I'm sure others, well, I know obviously others, but have expressed that actually when you see groups of people together who all know each other, that can be off-putting. So this is why having groups like Nathaniel's, having mental health swim groups, having Blue Mind Men, having Open Mind Active, all of these spaces becomes absolutely crucial, because we need, anyone can walk up to a pond, anyone can walk up to the Serpentine Lido or whatever it may be, but actually then crossing into that space. You know, I literally have taken people, adults, by the hand to hold their hand and give them support to get them into the water, and the elation that they experience when they've been in the water and they come out again. You know, it is so powerful. So that social side, it really can't be underestimated. But having that trusted individual to go into water with, because, you know, cold water is dangerous. Rivers are dangerous places. And so it is that space of trust, assurance, learning, knowledge exchange, education, becoming part of a swim community, where you also then over time become one of the knowledgeable who can then transfer. So, you know, building these collaborations, having people like Nathaniel work with, you know, people like, you know, Ben and Phil and myself, you know, bringing expert, you know, all of us together, working with community leads. That's how we can start to really potentially begin to mobilise a shift in trust, a shift in perception.
Just add one thing. One thing that we're really good at is making rules and regulations and guidance. We're dead good at that. National governing bodies are brilliant at making it really hard for people by the things we wear, by the way we say that participation can happen. You know, I dare to say the EA are good at doing that as well, and other authorities, the PLA, we're all good at making rules. And what these community groups do is and help people break down and understand the norms, the cultures, the informal rules that are around getting into our activities. You know, if you look at the Paddling on the Tideway document, which is a great document, very thorough, but actually for somebody who lives locally in a tower block who might have bought an inflatable boat, actually it's almost impenetrable if English is maybe not your first language. So by being able to go and join a group, a community group, and see, oh, actually that's how I do this and that's what that means. Oh, it's not actually, I don't have to read that thick document. So I think that's a really important part of community groups, is being able to almost break down the impenetrable, unwritten, informal rules and guidance and documents that we kind of generally put in place around our sports.
It was really just to say, one thing we've witnessed, in particular with the open water sort of outdoor swimming community, is that sense of community is so particularly strong within that community and particularly welcoming. But as Caroline rightly says, it's welcoming once you're in it, and you know how welcome it is once you're in it, but it's that hurdle to take the plunge to get into it, to witness those benefits that we need to really work and help to break down so that everyone can, because once people are in the community, then they recognise and see how strong and how positive it is on all their lives.
Thanks. And finishing us off, Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you, and please only answer if you've got anything additional, because I think we've probably covered a lot of what we've got. But is there any additional challenges about trying to make rivers swimmable in the broader sense of that we're thinking about it in an urban environment than there would be elsewhere?
I think there's an I think there's an attitudinal issue or change, really. I think our approach to risk, you know, we all accept that there is inherent risks with swimming as an activity, although it is an incredibly safe activity. There are inherent risks with getting into the water and on the water doing any activity. But I think as a society, we have to be more open about those risks and acknowledging that we're mitigated. You know, the benefits outweigh them. So we need to change the mindset to how can we open up more of these spaces? Where can we make progress? Rather than thinking, no, these are dangerous spaces. Like, well, let's keep people out. Yes, in certain circumstances, locations, that's completely right to keep people out that shouldn't be in. But as a general mindset, we need to flip that and try and be looking at always, how can we open up access to this? How can we make it more easy for people to enjoy these for recreational use? And if we flip that mindset, lots of good stuff will happen and we'll make real progress in the whole heap of areas.
Yeah, I'll just come in there as well. I think one of the things, certainly in the Blue Space Forum Inequalities and Health report, there was a whole section around urban space and urban planning. And I suppose if we think about it, a lot of the waterways that we have that have perhaps not been redeveloped, and you know the majority of them have not, they're hidden, they're dark, they're unknown, they're perceived to be unsafe. There is so much potential in terms of urban architecture and sustainable architectural design, sustainable planning, where we actually interweave water, whether that's swimmable water or not. You know, the brilliant example is the Diana's Fountain in Hyde Park. I was there just recently, and it was just, the word that comes out, it was just beautiful. There were so many people from so many different, you know, persuasions, old people, young people, you know, people, just so many people using that space. Some were walking around it, some were walking through it. They've got the way in which it's all designed, sorry, I'm going to become almost evangelical about this, but the way in which that space is designed is a wonderful example of how we can integrate beautiful, not aesthetically pleasing, you know, it's fountain type, you know, it's functional, it's practical, it is a draw, it is a magnet for people to come and be in water. People who cannot swim can engage with water in these types of spaces. So I think, look, there's a whole range of different ways within the urban landscape that we can actually integrate water far more proactively into the urban experience. So it becomes part of our lived experience as urban dwellers, urban visitors, because that's one of the things we want to be able to do. We want to be able to connect, engage, but encourage people to dwell in these spaces, because the longer you can dwell in that space, and it's not a transient, oh, well, I just rush past the river because I put my head down after a night out on a run because I feel unsafe, or it's not a space where it's, oh, well, I just passed that on my way to work. It becomes a space to stop and dwell. You think about things like the urban beaches. You know, we talked before about the kind of the swimmable cities, but, you know, there's some fantastic examples across the world of urban beaches, pop-up beaches, you know, pop-up ways of being in and beside water. So there's a whole range of opportunities there as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. We actually have one out there in summer as well, which is quite interesting. And I was just wondering particularly about paddleboarding. I mean, I represent Enfield and Haringey. We have the River Lee through there, and I'm trying to think, I'm not sure you could put swimmers there, because we already have conflict between kayakers and barge users. So I'm assuming wherever the Mayor is looking at perhaps broadening out the use of a river, there would have to be some segregation, because there would be some natural conflict, I'm assuming. With swimmers won't necessarily want to be swimming with kayakers or barges or whatever.
So I think there. I think it's a fair comment to say there are instances where there are issues, but I think as a general rule, there's plenty more instances where all these users can coexist and do coexist and get on fine with a shared sort of cooperation, collaboration between them to understand that these places can be for all of us, and with just a little bit of give and take on either side. So there will be things about if you're swimming to make yourself as visible as possible so that people can see. There's steps you can take to sort of mitigate. So I think it's perfectly possible to have spaces that can be used by a whole range of water users, that it doesn't have to be a either or and in conflict all the time, except there will be instances where poor behaviours by one group or another might cause conflicts.
Okay. Well, we've heard today about the Mayor's ambition to try and make London's rivers more swimmable, and he set out where he thinks there might be some potential sites, but obviously they're up for grabs and for talking. What do you think the Mayor and other stakeholders could do to ensure that our activities on and by rivers are properly accessible as these plans move forward? What would you like to see from the Mayor or from others?
What I would like to see is him talking to the groups of people that are going to actually use them. I really don't think it's rocket science. It's like if you've got a group of people, if we know the challenges that our urban communities within London are facing, if we know the mental health crisis, if we know the physical health crisis, if we know the issues around poverty and socioeconomic deprivation, if we know the benefits that access to and being in and around blue space can bring, then it's about saying, OK, well, we know currently what exists and what works across the UK and across the world in a whole range of different contexts. But instead of taking and implementing or imposing those, it would be about actually being a bit creative in how we talk to, and I'm a great advocate for creative methods and how we engage in conversations and co-design and actually collaboration. But it's taking those ideas, but importantly listening. So the research that we did with the Environment Agency, it was like there was quotes like people were saying, it is hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to be vulnerable. Okay, well, what do? You listen, you learn, and you act.
So I'm sure engagement will be taking place, but I think your message is do it now.
Do it now, right from the beginning. Yeah, right from the beginning.
Yeah. I absolutely couldn't agree more. You got there before me. You know, there was a question earlier which I think was asked. I can't remember who asked it, but I think was asked who should be part of the process or who should be consulted. And the people that weren't mentioned, I don't think there was a list, but the people that weren't mentioned were the people, the users. Yeah. Us, the people who actually use the river already, who row, swim, sail, paddleboard, canoe, kayak, whatever it is we do, we should be top of that list because we're already doing it. And we probably know the river better than anybody. There was also another question, sorry, are these both related to yours?
I think that was in relation to quality, what here we could do about the pollution in the river. So there are those partnerships. For this, you're saying it's you, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. And is it achievable? I think it is. You know, I don't think we have the technology, we have the means, the engineering to do these things. What we maybe are lacking, possibly, is the will, the investment, the transparency to get the job done. So I think it's great to aim high. I think it's great to have that aspiration to make it swimmable in 10 years, and I think it is achievable. But you've got to include people who are doing it already and will be part of co-creating those opportunities and creating the spaces. You know, people like Nathaniel who are creating those opportunities to get people on the water. So yeah, I think it is achievable.
Good. And can I ask you, you're going to answer, have you got any good examples of where places have done this early engagement and co-design already?
Yeah, I think there'll be examples from places that have gone through bathing water applications and states where they've great examples where they've worked with local community groups, and really, because part of that you have to show local support for applications. There's been plenty of examples there where stuff's been co-created, co-designed.
You could let us know, that'd be helpful. Yeah,
will do. And I was jumping in to chime into Ben's point, because I think what the mayor can do and use his role to do is show that political will, drive this forward, because there'll be lots of dragging feet, I think. So it needs someone who has the coalescing position to keep driving this forward, keep making this a priority to actually make it happen, because I think it can, but it requires that political will, and I think he's ideally placed to show that and deliver that.
Yeah, Nathaniel?
And yeah, to just jump in as well, Surfers Against Sewage, obviously a great charity working to clean up our waterways and coastal lines. They have an annual bathing water forum event, which I spoke at this year, and what it did was bring people from all over the country together that have had successful and unsuccessful bathing water status applications. So what that really helped for everyone in the room was they got to I guess, disseminate all the information and process and talk about how it actually worked. And when we talk about stakeholders, it's not just the people that walk along the riverway, it's the farmer that is a few miles away. That is also a part of it as well, along with the water waste management company as well. So I think what will come as a result of those annual events as well is more guides to how to set up a bathing water status, what to expect, how to get people involved, and so on and so forth. So I think that will help people give them the confidence to go forward to do it. And if that confidence and energy can be matched by, a mayor of London, that would be great, because it gives the power from the top all the way down to the bottom too.
Can I just add briefly at the end there? One thing that we've not actually talked about is the relationship. We've talked about physical health and mental health and greater social cultural inclusion, but the one thing that we've not actually talked about, which has got a very significant potential, is that when people become invested in blue space, they enter a reciprocal relationship where it's in their absolute interest to become stewards of that space. Very brief example, I swim down at Frensham Ponds. We do get blue-green algae, but we also get hordes of people coming down during the summer, because it's an inland beach, the rubbish, the refuse that's left. So we have taken it upon ourselves to set up Friendship Footprints, which is it's like very embryonic, but we go down and we have litter picking. There are so many beach cleaning kind of events, or just regular beach cleans. People will go down and every time they go for a dip or a paddleboard or whatever, they pick up plastic, they put it in their pocket and they take it home, wash it, recycle it, put it in a bin, whatever. And so there's really something, and again, the reference back to the march on the 3rd of November, 15,000 people taken to the streets of London. That is, and so many different organisations were represented in that space. You know, there was swimmers, there was, paddleboarder, but there was also conservation groups. And so when we talk about actually, we've got lots of people who will use the riverways, or we've got lots of people who will use, and there's all this kind of talk about, anglers and sailors and, all these, and it's almost like a tense relationship. And I think there's a real opportunity, and I think the Mayor's got a real opportunity here to actually address that and begin to change the narrative, change the discourse and the rhetoric that's used around stakeholder relationships within Blue Space, because actually there is a huge opportunity here for this I can't say that word, reciprocity. I was doing so well and then I tried to use that word. The reciprocal relationship, where actually by getting communities and people involved with Blue Spaces, we will therefore naturally create a cycle whereby those blue spaces become looked after. There's always anomalies to that, of course there are, but there's a real opportunity here to be highlighted.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all very much, and certainly as I cycle home now along the canal, I shall reflect on it differently. That was really helpful and invaluable, so thank you very much all for coming and contributing. We've got a tiny few items of business to deal with, so please feel free to pack up. We won't be offended, but we'll just carry on speaking in a strange sort of language. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree on the output arising from the discussion? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for 9th of January 2025 at 10 a.m. in the Chambers City Hall. So happy holidays, happy New Year, whatever you celebrate. I have no more urgent business, which concludes today's meeting. Thank you.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the